Thank you.
Item number 4, they're missing the architect, so if that comes up and they're not here, they'll request to be pushed back on the agenda as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good evening. Welcome to the Monday, February 12th meeting of the Green Bay Plan Commission. What is your pleasure regarding the minutes?
Move to approve.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. Communications. Number 1, request of Alderman Geisema that the city review planning ordinances with respect to parking and setbacks that fall in front of front doors. Recommendation, refer to staff.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to refer to staff. Alderman Zima, would you like to speak on this matter?
Yeah, I don't have any problem with it, but it's, it comes up quite often at the zoning board of appeals. And every case is a little different, but there's some technical aspects of the ordinance that, for the sake of having the fire department be able to enter a house, and some people have said, well, we'll block off the driveway at the point where it would still allow room for fire people to get in. And there's some cases where it's the only practical thing to do, and of course they make their choices, who to grant variances and not to, but I was there present. It wasn't from my district, but I suggested that maybe we should take a look at it, and the whole committee agreed with that, because they keep getting these situations where they feel favorable about making the variance, but it's got this technical problem that, well, it prohibit the fire department from driving in because the driveway would be in front of the door. And I think if there's some change to the provision that would allow, hey, yes, we want to, as long as it's more than a certain distance from the door, that, that it would be allowable, if in their discretion, that, wouldn't ruin the sightliness of the neighborhood or whatever. So, but they would very much appreciate a review of that part of it, and whatever changes could be made to allow them to make those judgment calls. So that's it.
Okay. Thank you.
And again, it wasn't my district, but I happened to be there, and I gave that friendly amendment to them, and they seemed to very much appreciate it, so that's why it's here before you.
Okay.
Glad you have that context.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a motion and a second to refer to staff. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Alderman Dorff, would you like to speak on this?
Thank you. So the person involved lives in my district and talked to me at length today. But it's Alder Nicholson's district that this property is in, so he just owns property. So it's really, there's a whole bunch of alders kind of involved in this. And I did email Alder Nicholson today just to let him know that this was coming up tonight here, and that the person had called me, and I think that they should call Alder Nicholson too, because I know he has some strong feelings about driveways and, this particular ordinance. I just think everyone should be heard on it.
I agree.
So, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, refer to staff. Item number 2, request by Alderman David Gnanig that the Law Department and Planning staff provide the Plan Commission with an update regarding the new state law about conditional use permits. Recommendation, refer to staff.
I'll just comment on it real briefly. There was an article in the February issue of the municipality that analyzed the change in state law, and it affects how local governments approve or deny conditional use permits. So reading that, I thought it would be a good idea for the commission to have a briefing on that and a discussion on that, because it may affect what we do in the future, and something council members ought to be aware of as well. So I have no problem with referring it to staff. The attorney's office said that by our next meeting they could provide us with an update. So that's what that was about.
Okay, thank you.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to refer to staff. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Old business. Number 3, consideration with possible action on a request to rezone 522 Clement Street / 522 Rothie Street from light industrial and general industrial to very density residential, submitted by Dennis Hecker and Daniel DeKaiser, property owner. In addition, the planning staff is expanding the request to include the following parcels: 544 Clement Street / 553 to 559 Rothie Street, tax parcel 21-1254-2-B, light industrial to very density residential. 565 to 609 Rothie Street, tax parcel 21-1254-2-A, light industrial to very density residential. 2450 University Avenue, tax parcel 21-1254-2, light industrial to general commercial. And 2492 University Avenue, tax parcel 21-1254-3-1, light industrial to highway commercial.
Mr. Chairman. Okay, so I think you've seen this all before, actually very recently. But this is a rezoning request now for a total of six parcels, 2 original from the petitioner, 4 added by staff. And it's basically the area on University Avenue, Clements on the west, Rothie on the east, right over by the new Festival Foods and Quick Trip. So the original proposal was just to rezone the southern portion of that property to allow for the development of a multifamily development. When staff looked at the rezoning request, it's really just a cleanup rezoning in our mind. So I'll kind of go to the next one. So this is our comprehensive plan, 2022 Smart Growth Plan. You can see this area is designated for medium and high density housing and also commercial at the for the Riviera Lanes and then also along University Avenue. This is an excerpt from the University Avenue Corridor Plan. And the area for the rezoning is the far western portion of Catalyst Site 2, which shows multifamily use there. It shows the existing uses and then some commercial along University as well. And then this is our current zoning map, and you'll notice the predominant zoning there in all the areas that we are reviewing right now is light industrial and general industrial zoning. So they are not compliant with our Smart Growth Plan or our University Corridor Plan. And as I had mentioned, this is just sort of a cleanup. They came before the Plan Commission on January 8th. At that time, the item was tabled to allow the petitioner a chance to speak with area residents and property owners and kind of introduce it to the public. A neighborhood meeting took place on the 17th of January. There were 2 attendees. Both were supportive of the request to rezone. Now, the site plan, staff has been working with the developer on a site plan for that southern portion. It's not really contingent on the rezoning. Rezoning, again, is cleanup to match our adopted plans. But the thought was primarily about a 90-unit apartment and townhome development in phases. When staff looked at it, we also wanted to expand those 4 other lots to basically bring those into compliance with the comp plan as well. So the old gas station site, which is now vacant, would go to a C2 highway commercial to be consistent with the other zoning along University. Riviera Lanes would go to a C1 designation, which is appropriate for that type of use, and then all the rest of the areas would go to the R3 zoning, the very density. So staff is recommending approval of the rezoning requests. We do feel that they further the comp plan, they further the redevelopment that's going on out there with Festival and future redevelopment of the JBS site, consistent with all our plans, and there we go. Aldermen and neighboring property owners have been notified of the request. We only received an informational inquiry.
Thank you. Do you have interested parties?
Yeah, I don't know if there is anyone here that's interested in speaking on this issue.
There is.
There is? Okay, I'll move to open the floor for interested parties.
Do I have a second? Second. We have a motion and a second to open the floor. All in favor?
Aye.
Dennis Hecker?
I'm just here to answer any questions if there's any.
We do have questions. If you come up to the podium, please.
And Mr. Hecker, I
Yes.
don't have a question. I just want to thank you very much for arranging the neighborhood meeting. I know when just a couple of people show up, it's sort of like, why do
Right.
we do this? But it's important for the neighbors to have known they had that opportunity, and I
Okay.
appreciate your cooperation.
No problem. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anybody else wish to speak on this matter? Okay, hearing none, we will close the floor. Any further discussion?
I just add that I do appreciate scheduling a neighborhood meeting, because I had some calls prior to that time, people wanting to know what it was about, but actually it's our staff outnumbered the residents that showed up at the meeting. And when people saw the plans that were proposed, Mr. Hecker and his family were there and shared the plans. Residents liked what they saw, people who were there, so I don't see any reason why we can't proceed with the rezoning. They still need to, do the site plan and bring that in and so on, but I don't see any problem with this.
Okay. The chair will entertain a motion.
Make a motion to approve the request as recommended.
And I second.
We have a motion and a second to recommend approval of the request. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 4. Are all the participants here for that item?
No.
Okay, we'll move it back then. Item 5. Consideration with possible action on the request to authorize a conditional use permit for a two-family residential use within a low-density residential district located at 877 Howard Street, -205 Hazel Street, submitted by NeighborWorks Green Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, this is a request for a conditional use permit for a two-family use in the low-density residential district. As you had mentioned, and you can see on the map, it is on the southeast corner of Hazel and Howard Street, just north of the pickle factory. This property was developed and the structure was constructed in 1924 as a side-by-side two-family home. Our comprehensive plan recommends low to medium density housing, which supports single, two-family, limited townhomes. And you can see that's in the darker orange color. So you have commercial to the south and recommended just single-family or low density to the west. The zoning kind of reflects that R1 zoning, so it is single-family zoning on the site. And these are a couple photos just using Google Street View of the house. So the one on the left is the front view from Howard, and the one on the right is the front view from Hazel. You can see the two separate entrances entering the house. Again, it's a side-by-side. Built in '24, Some people call it a Spanish revival or a Mediterranean revival style home. But there you go. So the property had been used as a two-family for years and years. It was acquired by the Redevelopment Authority in June of last year, and then it was transferred ownership to NeighborWorks Green Bay in December. NeighborWorks plans to rehab the exterior of the structure pretty substantially. Also, they would be removing, there's currently two driveways, one on Howard, one on Hazel. They would remove both of those driveways, and they're proposing to install a new driveway on the southern portion of the Hazel street frontage, which would lead back to a two-stall garage. Because the property had been vacant for greater than 12 months, the non-conforming two-family use becomes an illegal use. That requires this conditional use permit request and a conditional use to reestablish a two-family use in the R1 district. As you know, as you probably know, parking is usually the biggest issue. With the installation of a two-stall garage and a new concrete driveway leading to it, the 4 required stalls can be provided. Staff is in support of the conditional use permit for two-family use. We feel that is consistent with the low-density designation, kind of the makeup of the neighborhood, which is kind of a mix of uses, and also the land use recommendation of the comprehensive plan. Furthermore, the site itself is a small site, small lot. It's a little over 6,000 square feet, but it does have the capacity to meet all of the requirements of the zoning code as far as parking and setbacks and so forth. Alderman Zima and Seymour Park Neighborhood Association, as well as surrounding property owners, were notified of the request. At the time, as of this time, we have not received any inquiries. We are recommending approval
Thank you.
with 4 conditions, and they're pretty standard conditions that they meet UDC. All other conditions of the zoning code are met that aren't addressed in the conditional use permit, that they remove the driveways and return those to green space and submit a site plan for the new parking.
Thank you. Alderman Schreier.
Thank you. David, I might have a question. It is a two-family now, correct?
It's a vacant two-family.
It's a vacant
Correct.
two-family, okay. What is the size of the building, any idea?
Yeah, the structure itself, now it's 2 stories, but it's just about 3,000 square feet.
Well, I know that over time, we've looked at some of the planning issues in some of the older neighborhoods, you know, we're converting, let's say, multifamily down to two-family or down to single-family, that type of thing. I'm just wondering if there's any thought that it possibly could be a single-family home as opposed to a two-family.
It would, and the petitioner can probably address this better than I, but it would take substantial work to convert that back to a single.
So right now, it is a two-family as is? Okay.
It is a two-family. It was designed as a two-family.
All right.
And as you can see, it's interesting. The older two families, you know, they do have their separate entrances. They do both have a street presence on both sides, both facades.
All right, okay, that's all. Thank you.
Alderman Zima.
I have some of the similar concerns. I know I originally put in the request, probably more than a year ago, to that we acquire this under the Neighborhood Enhancement Program, because it has been a troublesome property for off and on for a long time. At one time, they were going to make it a halfway house for, you know, prisoners released, and of course, the neighborhood went really into high gear against that. And it's been a problematic property off and on. And as you can see, the property is very large for really the size of the lot that was mentioned by Mr. Buck. The neighbors that I talked to really were hoping to see it taken down and maybe a single-family house, a habitat house or something, go into there and, you know, with ownership, because there hasn't been ownership there over the years. And they originally, we looked at it and they were asking too much money. And I learned some months ago that the city had acquired it for a very reasonable price. It probably about 1/4 of what we were originally asking for. But our views were, I don't know how much money. I've learned that NeighborWorks has acquired it, and I really wish I had been in on those conversations. But especially since I did the initial request, but if they did notify me, I'm neglecting, but I don't believe they did. But I don't know if someone from there is here from NeighborWorks, but because it did have a very bad foundation problem. And, if you look at the lines, the porches are going down, the stucco, which is always difficult, is not in good condition. It sounds like they're going to, make a very large investment in improving the house. Now, that said, if it is going to be two-family, well, it's got a new owner and a better landlord, we think. And it will not be home ownership, though, which the neighborhood had hoped to convert more places to home ownership. That's the reason we made these zoning changes some decades ago, really. And, it's I think they're making the best of this if it's going to remain a two-family, but I just wonder if they're going to do this really extensive, going down to the 2x4s inside there. Is there a way to maybe reduce the size of the property and, redo it in such a way that it could become a single-family house? Are somebody from Neighborhood Works here?
They are, yes.
I guess I'd like a little discussion about it. And it's just kind of unfortunate because you can see it's a big square box property. I've been told by people that have gone through it that there are, some Art Nouveau type features on the inside that, have some history perhaps in it. But, the property was in pretty bad condition. And if they're going to spend $150,000, I don't know what they're going to spend, but if they are, is there a way to maybe do something to reduce the size of the property or really consider putting a different property there altogether? I guess I'd just like to hear from Neighborhood Works about it.
Thank you.
Move to suspend the rules to give interested parties.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Tim Dennison?
I'm Tim Dennison, Project Manager for NeighborWorks Green Bay. So I can speak to some of the questions that we had here. First of all, Mediterranean. Second of all, NeighborWorks Green Bay, when we look at a property, we would typically look at deconversion as our first thought. It always has. We've deconverted dozens, if not more, properties around Green Bay from multifamily into single-family use. However, this one was originally built as a two-family, so it has 2 kitchens, 2 stairways, 6 bedrooms. It really isn't feasible to convert it back to a single-family home. It wasn't built that way. One of the advantages of NeighborWorks renovating this building is we plan to keep it in our own portfolio. So what that'll achieve is having an owner and steward of this property that has the exact same mission as the City of Green Bay. So our mission is the same as the City of Green Bay's mission. And our forward thinking goes beyond Noel Halverson and myself and Scott Schieneman. We plan projects to exceed our short time at NeighborWorks. We envision NeighborWorks as being something that's going to go on and on and on and on. So As far as stewardship of the property, I think that's in good hands. We are going to do an extensive renovation on it. And that I spelled out as well as I could for David, if there's any questions on what we're doing, but we are going to revive the exterior. The foundation has already been repaired. That is sound and engineered, so that's already done. We are going to reinstall the rosettes around the top, put in the new capping to outline the revival top of the building. And so it will be a very, very nice looking property when we're done. Yes?
Could you tell me, how much, what is the budget you have for this property? What did you acquire it for from the redevelopment authority? Or
I don't know if I want to share that here, but what we
Well, and the only reason I'm just wondering what it was purchased for and what you're going to stick into it and all. I mean, what is the total investment in this property going to be in the end? I know you can't foresee everything, but what is your budget for this property?
I wrote scope. I did not get pricing back yet. It was not sent out for RFP yet, but I'm guessing $120,000 to $150,000, I'd say.
Well, it's just when you consider that amount of money,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, I think before you stuck any money into it, you probably should have come to this commission first. You know, you knew it had lost its non-conforming use there.
Mm-hmm.
And, but you know, that's water under the dam, and I want to say to the committee that I think that the plan they want to, from what I've seen, the plan that they want to do is the best you could possibly do in keeping it a two-family. But, again, you see the size of the property, you know, at $150,000, I mean, I don't know what it would cost to tear it down, $15,000, $20,000 or something, and, you know, you put a $100,000 house on it, you're under that budget, and you have a single-family house in the neighborhood, because there are no other buildings in the neighborhood there that are of this square box vintage here. Now, I'm sure the property will probably look nice, but again, it's a large property on a small lot, and the neighbors were really hoping for just a single-family house that had home ownership. And they thought that was the best stability for the neighborhood.
Okay.
But you know, $150,000 budget, you can do a lot and put it back to a single family there. Is there that much really worth historically saving in there? I mean, do you consider it a historical building?
What would the question be then? I mean, what is your question?
I guess the reason why you wanted to restore it
Okay.
rather than have it torn down.
Because, number one, to take it down and put up a new infill, we do plenty of that too. We're doing some in your district right now. That would not be as economically feasible.
No, I'm not here to criticize anything.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering
Yeah.
what the thought process was here.
Yeah, that was the thought process.
Because
To take it down
The neighbors
and-
really did want to see a single-family house if they could.
Sure.
Not converting this to necessarily a single-family, just taking it down and putting a single-family house in its place.
Yeah, when we looked at what we could sell a single-family home for on that parcel, and the costs of taking it down and building a new single-family home, the numbers didn't work out as well as renovating.
But like, what if it was a Habitat house?
I'm not sure, I'm not with Habitat.
Well, I mean, those are the things, and, you know, you would have liked to have this discussion before people started working. But it isn't the case, but it's an oversized property for the lot. And I guess you know, if anybody's gonna own it, I guess we just assume it's Neighborhood Works, because we know that they don't do subpar work at all, but this is the final chance we'd have at trying to put a single family that more fits the rest of the neighborhood. There are 2-family houses in the neighborhood there, but they're not big boxes like this. But if there was
Yeah.
some historical reason to try to preserve it, you know, that might be a different consideration.
Yeah, I do think that when we're finished with it, it will, historically, it'll be very nice. One of the reasons we had to go ahead with some repairs with the building is because it was December, and any frost penetration or anything happening to the building would have been catastrophic. So we had to get it to a point where we could heat the basement and keep it warm, at least to save the building.
How much money have you spent on the property so far?
I'm not sure today.
I mean, they just repaired the foundation, basically. Do you have any idea what that cost?
And we installed some heat in the basement.
Sorry, is this something under $10,000?
No, it's in the $10,000 neighborhood, yeah.
Well, yeah, the committee understands what I'm saying. It's a choice of, you know, should we do something different with the property?
Yes.
If I could repeat one of the questions the alder asked you, are there particular historical elements in this building, beside the rosettes, that would be saved by keeping the basic configuration?
Both entry porches, they have tile roofs on, and they're got masonry walls alongside them. We're gonna, went to a fair amount of extent to keep them when we repaired the foundation, because we did dig up the foundation. And also the outline of the parapet walls, I think are very important to the structure. So we're going to make sure we maintain them.
And I'm sure the neighbors will be very...
The outline of the parapet walls up on top, around the building, there's
Are there
arches.
historical things inside?
Just the period woodwork. It's got nice woodwork, wood floors. Staircases that are original.
And
The-
I'm sure the neighbors will be very pleased with the additional green space from reconstructing the drive and garage.
Yeah, the interior is actually in pretty good shape.
Cool.
So,
Alderman Steyer?
Thank you, Chair. One thing in the city of Green Bay, we have an advisory ordinance right now for historic preservation. I'm thinking the push is to try to get an ordinance on board that would deal with situations like this, so that in the future, you know, folks could come to our committee and we could lend advice. I mean, right now, it's not in a historic district. If it was, then you would come before the Historic Preservation Commission and we could give you advice and that type of thing. That's all advisory right now. But the goal is to get a mandatory ordinance on the books so that with these situations, and I believe that this has historical integrity, partly with the age of the building, but some of the elements, it's a Mediterranean style, like you said. The window of some of these architectural styles over time, maybe from the 1880s to the 1930s, that was the high period of many of these structures. And something like this is 1924, it falls into that vein. So, and we're interested in the facade, the outside. What happens inside, you know, we don't, you know, folks do things and you can still do some nice things, but we're worried about the street appearance. And I kind of echo what Alder Zima said, that, you know, if there was a way that we could convert it to a single family, I think that is a goal, to try to downsize in some of these historic or older areas. But I think the fact that it was built as a 2-family, I don't have a big problem with that. But I'm just saying that as time goes on, hopefully this year, we'll be able to have an ordinance in place that we can avoid some of these issues and come right to the source, get some good advice, and then move forward. So, thank you.
Like I said, our mission would always be to deconvert, typically.
Thank you. Could I ask one more question? Have you projected what the rents would be?
No, I could guess. I don't know what they want to be. They're 3-bedroom.
So
And
those are in high demand.
they'll be high-end 3-bedroom. Yeah. It's gonna be it'll be very, very nice inside. Be very pretty. Wood floors, big trim, nice staircases.
You bet you move back to Howard Street. Okay, thank you.
I'm going to ask to be excused from voting on this because I serve on the NeighborWorks board and I don't want an appearance of conflict.
So noted. Thank you. Is there anybody else wishing to speak on this matter? Okay, hearing none, I'll close the floor. Any further discussion among the commission? It's my feeling that, as Mr. Dennison said, the first option would always be to convert if possible. But in this case, as the building was originally built as a 2-family, and it's historically been used as such, and apparently it's not cost effective to try to change that, I'm going to support the request.
And I will move approval, with that in mind, along with the conditions that David outlined.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor of approval, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And the city council meeting will be when? Monday.
Next Monday.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Item number 6. Consideration with possible action on the request to amend the I-43 Business Center Protective Covenants, the changing directional building signage requirements within the OA district for the parcel located at 2845 Greenbrier Road, submitted by Matt Kaminsky, Kaplaki Sign Company on behalf of Daycare Aurora LLC property owner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All right, this is the Daycare campus on the southwest corner of the I-43 Business Park. And you can kind of see it there on the map. The Village of Bellevue to the south. We kind of go to the next one. So this is our comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan obviously shows business park for the entire site. And as you can see there, the zoning is a little bit different because it has I-43 zoning. So as mentioned in the request, it is Executive Office A zoning. To the north you have Entertainment District, and Executive Office B sort of to the northeast. Now, it's my understanding, I haven't been here that long, but it's my understanding there's been several sign amendment requests for the business center or the business park, primarily to accommodate directional signage. So recent sign amendments have been all related to wall signage. There were some that were made in 2016 and some that were made in 2008, both for the hospital site. They are the exclusive occupant of that district. They are coming in now to request a little bit bigger directional signage. So the business park covenants limits directional signage to 6 square feet, which is very, very small, really kind of meant to be those little signs that you see on poles and parking lots and whatnot. So the petitioner's coming forward, they'd like to add signage at 8 different locations. It's probably easier to see in your packet than what you'll see on the screen, but the locations are all shown on the map, and they are all on the permanent canopy structures of the individual buildings. So there's 8 different canopies, and they are requesting to put, as you can see, directional signage on each one of those canopies, kind of designating, what entrance you're going into and where you're going, at varying square footages depending on the size of the canopy themselves. So as I had mentioned, they're very, very limited, the way that the covenants were written for the Executive Office A district. And so to accommodate the Baycare campus itself, which is a very large campus, and if you've been out there, you know it's kind of difficult to find your way around, at least it is for me. This petition is going to receive staff recommendation of approval. There is a amended plan unit development in your packets that kind of specifically calls out the 8 locations, the size of the signs, and locations. So with that, staff is recommending approval of the request, subject to the PUD.
And just a quick clarification, are the canopies already in place, so it's just a matter of the signage on the canopies?
Correct.
Is that correct?
All the canopies are in place.
Thank you.
Alderman Dwayne?
Yeah, thank you, Tom Dwayne. That is my district, and I tell you, if you ask my wife, she'll think that I built half that hospital, and it's great, but it absolutely needs it. It's what they're doing out there is fantastic. The money they're putting into that, and it's you go out there, it's mind-boggling. They have so much going on at one time. I mean, it's so I totally agree with this.
Thank you. Okay, I don't think we have any interested parties for this.
The older I get, the more I have occasion to be aware that it can be very, very disorienting to go into a medical situation that you are not familiar with and to find your way around. And even the size of the font can make a huge difference in whether or not you can do that easily. So I certainly am in favor of this.
I agree. Any further discussion? The chair would entertain a motion.
I'd move to approve the plan as proposed.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the recommendation. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Item 7, consideration with possible action on the request to amend the Grandview Place Planned Unit Development, Erie Road - Grandview Road, submitted by Tina Bunker, Humboldt Investments, LLC.
Thank you. So this might look familiar to some of you and brand new to some other of you that have not been on the Planning Commission for very long. This PUD was originally approved back in 2015. This took about 2 years to get established, so at a couple of iterations here and also at City Council. We have a document that was submitted from the petitioner, which was part of your meeting packet, that has 13 items that they were requesting for amendments. So I think the easiest way to go through this is just kind of walk you through each of those one by one to make sure we're all on the same page with each of the requests. To first familiarize yourself with the area, we're looking, this is the far east side of town. The southern road is Finger, bordered by Erie on the west, Grandview on the east, and then also Catalina Drive is a drive that's all the way to the north there. So this is for the entire development area that we're looking at. This is the existing development plan that we have in place. This was amended in 2015 to show the road layouts correctly, and this shows all the zoning and land uses that are approved for this area. So with the text request that you have in front of you, this is also the map request that you have, which is Exhibit D. So as we go through, those will be the things that I'll be referencing. So for the first 4 items, those are either things that we have added as part of exhibit changes or something that would be taken care of in our next application, which is for an official map amendment to change the road layouts. So those have all been taken care of. For item number 3, we have a couple concerns with some zoning changes. So in the original proposal, we had some senior living down here. That is being moved up to this portion here. So this has been moved out to a single-family residential use, which is agreeable with staff. The only issue that we found with this is that to keep the multifamily in this area, it became a flag-shaped lot, which we're not in support of. So rather than trying to squeeze multifamily in, we are recommending that this portion of that multifamily piece be brought into this senior living piece that was just moved there. And then this portion be brought into the commercial chunk that's up here. So that is part of our recommendation as part of this exhibit. Item number 5, we did not add into the draft PUD that we have. We believe that rear and side parking is very important as part of a traditional neighborhood development. Once we start doing front parking for multifamily units, you really lose that block face you're trying to create in those traditional neighborhood developments. So that is a request that we did not add to the draft ordinance that we have planned. Item number 6 was added that had some language about the facade changes, the requirement that facade on a corner unit be on the front and the corner. We removed the necessity for single-family homes to have that. Usually just through a site plan process and people building homes correctly, the facade is usually taken care of on a single-family home. So we did add that in this request. Item number 7, this was not added in. We are looking to assure that in a traditional neighborhood development that you want to make sure that you're looking at the neighborhood. This usually includes homes, parks, paths, sidewalks, people. So to add a restriction that would just allow the garages not to have a setback is not something staff is in favor of. So what we did, which I think is a fair compromise, is to add that there has to be at least a 5-foot setback from the main building to that garage area. So in other portions of the city, you are able to build a garage a little bit further ahead, which is when you get that kind of like suburban sprawl feel, where the garage is set forward and the building's set back. So with this, it gives us a 5-foot distance, which isn't a major distance, but the setback does do a lot for the frontage that we're looking at with the narrow lots that are part of a traditional neighborhood development. Number 8, we did switch over. There is some language in there that just details that you can texturize your materials differently to denote that it's a change in material, even if it isn't. So it does give it some different texturing things. Number 9 has been a major issue for this development. So stormwater management, we had originally put the caveat that all stormwater management facilities for the entire development area had to be approved before you could start dividing land. We've been running into issues with this because the wetland delineation, it has some approval and then some of it can't get approved because there might be a stream there, but it's winter and we can't go check. So what we have opted to do instead is to do a phasing with that. So the watershed areas we've worked through with the developer and their engineering team, and then our engineering team here at DPW. So we are recommending that they can do stormwater management in phases by watershed. So it wouldn't just necessarily be for a platted area, because you could plat smaller than this, but if they want to plat for a portion in phase 1, all of phase 1 stormwater management has to be done. This would assure that all of the drainage is taken care of on the front end versus trying to piece them together through different plats, which can be very complicated. So between the engineering team on our end and on their end, we've determined these watershed areas, and I think that these 3 phases would be the easiest way to get platting done while also making sure that the city's assets are protected with our stormwater management plans. Item number 10, they were looking to remove the requirement that there needs to be a connection to the public sidewalks from mixed-use buildings. So this would be the requirement that's a 5-foot wide sidewalk or pathway to get from a building to a public sidewalk. Obviously, we want to make sure that people are able to exit a building and get to the public infrastructure that's available to them. So we have not put that as part of our request. We are not in support of that. Section number 11, they are looking to discourage alleyways. We are agreeable to that, so that was added into the draft amendment. Item number 12 has been a major issue that's also involved our Department of Public Works and our Parks Department. So as you can see on the existing plan that we have and what was approved through council, we have this proposed park property that's up here and then another area down here that's got a major stormwater area that will, I mean, just from the looks of it, probably be very pretty because there's a pond there. So the idea is to connect north to south within this development. Everything's going to have sidewalks. We want there to be a pedestrian way that people do not have to walk on concrete infrastructure to do so. So with this, the trailway was originally proposed to snake through here. With the updated proposal, they had to adjust their stormwater pond, so this doesn't really give us a clear picture of what they were hoping to do. We do have some language in the next application for the official map amendment, so that way we can clear that up through our platting process, because we can take care of that there. Because it is pretty complicated. With the ponds, you can't cut through the stormwater ponds, obviously. To go around, there's a wetland here, so there's only so many materials that the DNR will allow you to use in a wetland area. So we think that's best for staff to figure out during the planning process. But with this request, they're looking to remove the requirement that the developer has to install the trail system. So right now with Chapter 14, it denotes that with any trail that's proposed as part of a major plan or a plat, that the developer would have to install that, and then the Parks Department would take over maintenance of that. So that's our standard operating procedure. It doesn't come up very often because we're not doing major plats like this, and a lot of our trail systems have already been installed. But they are looking to remove the necessity for them to do that. Staff is not in support of this. There doesn't seem to be any sort of hardship to prove that this developer, more than any other developer, shouldn't have to install these trails. And we really think that it's important that this is such a major area and there's so many different uses going on, that these type of infrastructures are installed at the time that the roads are installed to ensure that all types of users are able to get to and from the properties that we're proposing. And then for item number 13, we did not put this as part of our draft proposal as well. We do not require that lots get developed at the time of creation, or sidewalks get installed at the time of creation, which is, I think, how the text was proposed. We require that once a lot is developed, that there has to be sidewalks put in, and that's usually done at the tail end as to not to disrupt construction. Obviously, we don't want people to be creating lots, putting down sidewalks. The construction vehicles would then run over those sidewalks, ruin them. They would have to be redone anyway. So we already require this as a general in our Chapter 14, but specifically also with this PUD, that at the time that the lots are developed, the sidewalks have to be installed. That's standard language and it's standard practice, so we are not comfortable with removing that requirement in this area either. So those are the 13 amendments that they had proposed. Within the draft ordinance, it details the ones that we were looking to approve for them, and then within the staff report and just now, why we are not comfortable with the other requests. Anything to do with the road patterns and the trail location, that will all be taken care of in the official map amendment application, which is next. Ta-da. Yes.
That's a lot. Thank you so much for taking us through that piece by piece. I do have some specific questions I need to ask. First of all, on point number 7, you mentioned that the 5-foot setback for the garage from the front face of the building was a compromise. Was there a previous requirement in the PUD?
Not in the PUD, and if it's not in the PUD, it goes to our standard zoning. And within that has the setback information, but also within the PUD, we have standard setbacks on page 5.
Okay.
So within there, it kind of denotes that between the minimum and maximum setbacks you can have for a front yard, because typically we don't have maximum front yard setbacks either for single-family homes. So the PUD overrides our zoning code. So within this, if somebody wanted to put a garage closer, it would really depend where they want to put their house. So there was some wiggle room before, which would have made them probably completely incapable of doing anything to have the garage even close enough, because the setback maximum is in here, which we don't usually require within the city.
Okay.
So it wasn't necessarily detailed as part of this table originally, but I think it's a fair compromise to give them the 5-foot difference versus what could potentially be very negative, because we require a 20-foot maximum or minimum in our zoning code. So if they do 10 feet up, they have to go 10 foot back then, which could be a nightmare for a design feature as well.
Thank you. On number 9, that's on pages 10 and 11 on the PUD. And the way you now do minutes means that I don't have many opportunities to pull out my old teacher hat. But in this case, you start out at the top of page 11, the complete stormwater management plan shall be submitted at the time of the first land division for a phase is submitted. And I understand that you're talking about the stormwater management plan for that specific phase, right?
Yes.
A little bit confusing because the complete stormwater management plan has been used before to speak of the entire development.
Okay.
And I wonder if it might be changed to simply say the stormwater management plan for a particular phase, or the entire stormwater management plan for a particular phase, something that would make clear
Yeah, I'm
that
agreeable
you're
with
just
that.
talking about that. And let's see, then going forward.
I think, just if I may,
yes.
Commissioner Bremer, for that point, I think one of the things that we maybe want to make clear that we talked about in this. I think just the line between a conceptual plan and I think our engineers wanted a buildable plan. And I think just in there, we're looking for, or compromising by breaking it down by watershed, but in
Yes.
that we may have a conceptual for the whole thing, but for that one, we need a buildable or whatever type of language. I think so long as we don't lose that meets the intent.
Good. I would be very happy with that. On number 12, the walking trails, this refers to J9, added language in J9, and I could not find a J9.
They were requesting to add that.
Oh,
It would have been
okay.
a new addition that said walking trails, we don't install them.
Good enough. That explains a lot. And that's all I have. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Is there any further discussion? Review of interested parties?
Move to open the floor.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to open the floor. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Tina Bunker?
Thank you. I'd like to go through all the items that were removed from it, basically. I'm trying to go with my notes here. All right, for number 5, rear inside parking is to be used to ensure blocked face is not interrupted, so it was not done. And what I had said on there, I completely understand for the commercial properties that we want to try to move those parking lots to the rear. With specifically regards to multifamily, it should be struck from the sentence there, because one of the requirements in H of that same subset, section 3B, states that all multifamily units shall have an attached garage in its design. It is very difficult to attach a garage and also not face the road and meet a density of at least 10 units per acre. It is nearly impossible to meet all 3 of those criteria with regards to a design. And that's why I struck that primarily from the multifamily. It'll make these sites nearly undevelopable. Do you understand where I'm coming from?
So the city,
If we go to section 3, subset B, and then F.
multifamily and commercial buildings or a portion of such buildings shall be oriented to public right of way. The parking located in the rear or side yard to ensure the uses are integrated into the block parking.
But I have to also have an attached garage to each unit. Because that, and I understand why we want the attached garage, it's gonna increase the rents. It was something that the neighborhood felt very strongly about, that the units that those garages be attached. So now in order for me to orientate those that way and attach them and meet 10 units per acre, because that is also a requirement of a minimum, to be able to do all that is nearly impossible.
I need to ask the staff then, do you agree with her assessment that that's nearly impossible? How would you do that?
I mean, there are plenty of designs that I could get to you if you'd like to see them. Traditional neighborhood developments are not a new concept, so to be able to have the parking away from the street is ideal. I mean, that's just what you want to have as you're creating a neighborhood environment. You don't want to have the parking close to the street, so it's just a safety hazard. It doesn't look very good. It doesn't create a homey environment. But there is a way to have attached garages on units and still have the parking not facing the roadway. You just put the garages in the back portion, have a parking area in the back area. I'm not sure if there are any examples in the city that you can think of, Kevin.
No, I think that's where the developer is looking at in terms of by doing entrances on the front, there's additional, and having to have garages attached, there's additional pavement that's required in order to basically allow for circulation, so you're able to get to that area. With that, I think what she's saying then is that making it more difficult to come up then with the required density to get all those in there because of that extra pavement, you can't build on it right now. Give me a minute to think of a design that has the rear
Does Whitney Townhomes have attached garages? in the rear?
entry.
They do.
So yeah, so the Whitney Townhomes project that's proposed over on the block, they're building, well, two, both the existing
ones that are there.
and the ones that have been proposed. I think RDA did a term sheet. Those have the entrances, the buildings are pushed up to the sidewalk, very minimal setbacks, and the garages are attached rear entry. So there's a driveway, it's a private drive behind them, because those are ownership structures, there's some shared easements, so if I own house number 6 and I have an easement so I can get across them. Here, I don't know if it would matter, because it's a rental units, I mean, right, we're talking about multifamily rental units. But there's one, and then also the townhomes that were proposed on the Whitney School block are the same way, so front door on the sidewalk, attached garage.
And as I recall, the Whitney design, the initial ones also have the advantage then of creating a deck space on top of the garages.
Yes, so they use those as open deck space. I'm just thinking of one more, the ones that were also proposed in the, for the rail yard, as part of the DDL development, the conceptual plans that RDA approved. They did the same thing, and they basically made these pedestrian paths, public right-of-ways in the front. So the front doors faced a 20-foot wide kind of multi-use path, but then garages and services are all in the backside, kind of like an alley, more or less.
And there was also language in here saying that alleys would be discouraged but not prohibited, and this, I assume, would be an instance in
Well,
which alleys might be appropriate.
Two different, in this case, the alleys, they were alleys, like the DDL, the rail yard project is an alley because those are ownership units, or in the Whitney townhomes, those are ownership units, so there's some cross easements, but if they're rental, it's private, so it's a private driveway. So in terms of our requirements for space for a public right-of-way, it's private drive. I mean, there's still some requirements, but it's lesser than a full-on public street alley right-of-way.
So with that in mind, what would be your response to those ideas?
Very limited, very restrictive, it would be difficult to sell. I'm not saying that we can't try to do that, but to have to meet all of these requirements with the limited size, it's not like we have some great big giant spaces in there. I mean, the sizes of them came down greatly, and to meet all those restrictions is very cumbersome, too cumbersome for most people that would go in and look at that.
This is, of course, a special PUD with the traditional neighborhood, and that was part of the intention, was to have the fronts.
And I understand that
pedestrian
with
avenue.
regards to the commercial, and I certainly think that we can leave all these requirements that we have with the commercial. It's the multifamily component of it that if you look at the parcels, they're odd in shape, they're not big open spaces to be able to work with, so now I have to get that maximum density, but it's attaching those garages. And I don't want to, you have to tell someone, well, you can build this one style here, because that's really the only way it's going to work out. It would be difficult to sell. It's to tell someone, you have to have this particular style.
Thank you.
So that's that one. So, number... Okay, so number 7, I think what you're actually suggesting now is more restrictive for the entire development. What was agreed upon with Kim, the previous director, was that on Rocky Arbor Trail, this one street, the garage would be at least flush, rather than make the whole development have to have the garage set back in front of the house. So this just has to do, if I have a I have a house, my garage has to be set behind it. Okay, it doesn't have to do with the setback from the road, it has to do with the setback. And what was previously agreed to was that one street would have that. And I would rather just take it out and let a builder or a person, decide what they want to do. So what you're actually suggesting at this point is to actually make it more restrictive, both in terms of the setback as well as you're looking to extend it to the entire project, which I absolutely disagree with.
The portion of Rocky Arbor Trail had never made its way into the PUD, so if you're looking for it, it's not in there. It is not one of the requirements currently.
So you're looking to make my project more restrictive than it already is, and I'm asking for it to be less restrictive.
I disagree with that point.
I think, and part of where we're at today is we're looking to make compromises in terms of, I think a lot of this was before my time, but I know it was an extensive process of getting through to get to this PUD, and I know there was a lot of public involvement, no council involvement. And I think with that, we ran into a few things that obviously that prevented it from moving it forward. I think we figured out a way to get past some of those or move forward with some of those in terms of the phasing with the stormwater management, and being able to move some pieces around. I think what's been presented in terms of, requests for amendments and after discussion, with our staff, 13 requests. We said no to 5. I think there's a misunderstanding on 1. We said yes to 7. So, I think ultimately it's this body and ultimately council that decides on it. And I think in terms of where we came back with our no's, just trying to provide some reasoning behind that. And ultimately, it's up to this body to make a recommendation to council where those are at.
At this point, though, you're looking to make this more restrictive. I was looking to relax it, and you actually took the bar that we had and made it like 100%. And that was something that I fought from day one, because again, you're just very, not that you can't do it, but to be able to say you have to do this. Part of the goal of this development is for us to be able to provide a little bit smaller home, something that's needed out there. You look at the cost of what building costs are doing right now. There's a number of people out there that want a smaller footprint, both to maintain, both in an upfront cost, and to be able to do that, to make a smaller lot so you can put a smaller house on it. You really restrict how that garage has to be placed, and it makes a development more restrictive, and I that is not what we are looking for.
I guess I'll go back and I think one of the things that's tied into is with the multifamily and the requirement for, no parking and garages being on the public right of way. It's part of this traditional neighborhood development to provide some, design standards in terms of what that development would be. I think with that section, in terms of the requirements for that setback, I think partially what we wanted to avoid is houses where it's, all right, here's the house facade, and then there's 24 feet of garage in front of it, and really, as you go down the street, driving, walking, whatever, all you see is garages up and down. And so I think in terms of that look of, okay, well, we're doing a balance of pushing some of that obtrusiveness of the garage back in line with the house. I don't know if the commission would, consider as a compromise, and instead of a setback, moving back to a flush or a maximum projection from the house, in terms of moving forward with some type of compromise. I mean, you're looking to have it totally,
I guess I'd take it the way I had it, because at this point, you're looking to change something that I already have and make it more restrictive. And I don't think that that's something acceptable to throw in at this point.
But were you saying before that the oral agreement that you had before was for a flush?
Flush.
Yes,
And
I
it was
believe that's what
for these
Director Vaughn
14
just
lots.
said. Mhm.
And now you're looking to make it more restrictive and apply it to the entire development. I honestly don't believe that that is an acceptable thing to do at this point.
And your compromise was for the flush?
yeah, I mean, I'm looking at a compromise for a flush or a maximum projection to go throughout. And I think that's part of this. I mean, right now, I think we have a PUD that doesn't work, and we could leave it as is. But then we're back to the situation with our stormwater and then having to develop and getting delayed. And I think what we're trying to do is figure out a path to move forward, because I think you and the city would like to see development, in this area. And I think, as Ms. Hummel had talked about, trying to put in some clarification for the table on page 5 in terms of the minimum and maximum setbacks, is providing some dimensions to that, I think, because with those minimums and maximums, to get some consistency in the neighborhood of, okay, where homes are lining up. And in terms of, having, look, it's not exactly that they're all at one single line, but in terms of, there's a range or a balance in terms of the development that, things some aren't 10 feet and then some are 30 feet back. It's, I guess, putting a little more definition in terms of what we're looking for in terms of that range. So that's why I was going back to look at that compromise.
If you are looking to make this more restrictive than we already have it, I'm ready to withdraw this amendment and I'll withdraw, this is not acceptable.
I'm still trying to understand what Director Vonk is proposing. And if we look at page 7G, as I understand it, the all attached garages shall be set back at a minimum 5 feet from the primary structure. I believe this is what you had in mind when you said that it was extending the requirement to the entire development. Is that
I was
correct?
looking to relax the restriction.
I understand.
Yep.
You've said that very clearly.
Yep.
I'm asking you a different question.
Okay.
Is this what you meant when you said, is it the all attached garages that you had in mind when you said that they were extending the restrictions to the entire development?
I was trying to eliminate the restriction that we had on the first 14 lots. I guess I don't understand your question.
Yeah.
I'm very sorry.
Okay, you said two things. Number one, that you understood that you had an agreement that the garages could be flush. And this is changing that on that particular
for that particular
area.
Street.
And then number two, that this was always also trying to extend a new requirement to the entire development.
No, there was nothing for the rest of the development ever.
No, but did you say that this was trying to extend it to the rest of the development?
Well, the conversation that I had with Ms. Hummel actually said, we can't find it anywhere, so I was just looking to put language in so that should it come up somewhere, that it wouldn't affect things down the road. I'm just looking to, to clean this up primarily.
If I could also add for clarity's sake, just because there isn't something in here doesn't mean it doesn't automatically then resort back to our zoning ordinance, which is in place. So it's not that there wasn't ever a garage setback in here, it's just that since it wasn't noted
doesn't
in here
show up here.
specifically,
Yeah.
that means it goes back to our regular zoning code, which is 20 feet minimum.
Okay. So what we're dealing with here is a relaxation of the 20 feet minimum to 5.
By a compromise of the 5 foot, which I'm agreeable with Dr. Bonk, if this needs to be a flush conversation, or if we want to amend that table to say in this particular single family, you get this much for a garage, same thing, we can add the garage section into this table, but since it's not in this table and not in the text, it automatically resorts back to our zoning code, which is restrictive on garage distances.
I think that's what we were trying to get to, is that if we didn't specify, we specified 5 feet in the PUD, which supersedes the zoning code. If we don't have 5 feet in the PUD, it's 20 feet setback.
I'm not saying setback from the road. I'm talking about the garage setback from the house. I'm not talking about the road setback. I'm talking about the structure.
Yes, but in the PUD,
Correct.
since you can have a 10-foot front setback, that would allow somebody to do that, but then their garage would be 10 feet back
Sure.
from that, because that's how it's written in the code.
So I would be okay with minimum garage setback from the road, but not from the facade of the house.
Okay.
That my concern isn't with, I agree with you 100%. We can have some distance from the road to the start of the garage. It has to do with the design of the house that I don't want to be restrictive, so that the garage has to be behind the house.
Okay.
That's my concern.
So with that, the plan commission is agreeable to having flush versus any sort of setback or present. I would then recommend amending the table that's in section B3.
To reflect that.
Yes, which you can just tell staff to do and we can do, or we can discuss the details here. Whatever you'd like to do.
Can I ask a clarification? Will the garage be able to be in front of the house?
That would be for you guys to determine. That's your comfort level.
Because for the majority, for 90% of the development right now, it is. And you're looking to make it more restrictive, which was very
How far in
contentious.
front?
I mean, 20 is the normal now. I mean, I guess personally, I do think that's an eyesore. I could be agreeable to 15 feet or 12 feet
So,
in front.
Yep.
But a minimum setback of the road of 20 feet. Like, the garage has to be at least, 15, 20 feet from the road, but allow the garage to protrude from the house at least 15 feet. An average garage is 24 to 30 feet deep, so that would be half of it then. And I would consider that a reasonable compromise that would not, prohibit, design greatly.
Director Vaughn, doesn't that basically undermine the entire concept of the traditional neighborhood development? I thought the whole notion was to keep the garages from being out front of houses.
correct, and I think that's what Ms. Bunker's trying to work towards in terms of, look, traditionally it'd be 25 feet out in front of the house, you got a full-length garage.
Yeah,
We were going 5 feet behind the house,
yeah.
okay, so we got a delta here of 30 feet. And I think what we were trying to do is work towards a compromise, so that's why I said, okay, well, what if we go then flush or 5 feet protruding? I mean, sometimes that can be covered by a porch. I think I could get comfortable given some of these table things here with maybe 10 feet, but I think once we start to get beyond that, we're starting to move beyond the T and D. And again, I wasn't here when this was set up in terms of what those things were, in terms of those design standards and reasoning behind it and where those things went. I agree, a lot of the new construction out there is doing that with garage out in front. I think in this case, the neighborhood that the city and the developer are trying to build offers a little bit of an alternative to that by providing a little bit better density, which provides some affordability and some other things. So I think with that, that was some of the design considerations to bring the people, the front door, a little closer to the street, so there's not as much distance behind. So just, I guess from a professional opinion, we put 5 feet in because that 5 foot minus, because we thought that would be the best. I think moving back up to flush, be workable, but getting beyond that, once you start to push beyond, the 5 foot protrusion, I think, again, that's for this body to discuss in terms of setting that piece, but then we start to move further away from that quote-unquote traditional neighborhood that this PUD was.
That was my
built around.
understanding as well, and you did apply for this development as a traditional neighborhood development, and that was one of the principles that was built into it. So I'm not understanding why you are introducing this late in the game a major change in that principle.
I didn't see this as a major change. I was affecting 14 lots, and I would be happy to leave it just as what I originally had it as.
14 lots.
Which was for 14 lots, it had to be flush. There was no setback requirement. And to add additional restrictions to me at this point, I think is not satisfactory. I would not, I would agree to some reasonable amount, but to add a new design element with regards to this at this point, I would not support that at all.
Is this a new design element?
Yes.
I'm asking staff.
I don't believe so. I believe with the setbacks that are part of our code and the basic design principles of traditional neighborhood development, the size of the lots kind of give way to this. Because the language never made its way into the PUD, I'm not sure that we can go back to the original. Either way, we have to add something in here to deal with this problem, because there's nothing in here to deal with this problem right now. So if the Plan Commission and City Council are agreeable to doing the flush on Rocky Arbor and no other details for garages within this PUD, that needs to be added. If you think that there is some concession to be made for either a setback minimum or a protrusion maximum that you're allowed to have, all those things would have to be detailed here. This is something that we can work through with the petitioner internally, so we don't have to have a large discussion in this meeting. If you feel comfortable giving us that direction, or we could hash it out right now and I can add the language where it needs to be added in the next draft.
Understood. Thank you.
Alderwoman Dorr.
So I was looking at traditional neighborhood, and some of the pictures that I saw, the house is here, and then the garage is on the side, and it's coming out. Now, it's not like out in front of the house face-wise, but it's coming out from the front of the house. I guess I don't understand why one would be this restrictive. I did look at lots of pictures today about traditional neighborhoods, and I understand the idea of getting people closer to the sidewalk, right? So they can chit-chat or sit on their porch or whatever. But I live in District 1, and I drove through, and even on my block, more than half the houses have the garages that are protruding, and they're lovely houses and lovely garage. Sometimes I can't even tell it's the garage, because they have these gorgeous windows and such. I don't understand this. I don't support restricting the garages, and it's up to you guys. But I'm just going to say that was the one thing I really had trouble with, and I talked with Alder Nanig about that today, to restrict the design like that. I also think a neighborhood that's all little boxes, all looking the same in a row, I don't think that's very attractive either. So I just wanted to say that about the garages. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment. This last PUD we had, we've been working on this for 2 years. We probably had close to 8 or 9 personal with staff meetings on this, and every time we thought we got somewhere to get these projects going, something else got turned around. It's so frustrating. And now, when these 8 or 13 steps that are brought forward, I asked, did staff call you about their changes, and I hear no. I mean, this is what's really kind of makes me angry a little bit, because this has been going on over 2 years, and we're trying to get this project done. And now every time I turn around, there's a lot more changes. We're trying to simplify things. When I heard it's got to be flusher going back, you drive anywhere, you go to, the only way you're going to find it is Astor Park, the old neighborhoods on Cherry. There's the only place in Green Bay you're going to find this where it's set back like that. They're all, my house protrudes, my garage. Of course, I have that porch on the side. That even with as the garage comes out, what is it, 10, 15 feet? But I'm looking really to get this satisfied tonight so we can get this project going. I don't know what it's going to take, but I mean, those 14 units, whether it's 5, 10 feet, 10 feet, I don't see where that would be a problem.
Alderman Steuer?
Thank you, Chair. I guess I sat through this whole process too, so I understand the frustration that's set on both sides, for all the folks that were involved in this project. And you're looking at just those lots to the north, and Tina, you're saying that you're not looking for that in any of the other area. I'm just looking at the size lots that there are in the single family, if you will. And I'm going to be reading this over, believe me. I mean, there's a lot here as far as all the information that's been brought forward. And, we haven't talked about this entire project for quite some time now. We kind of thought things were just moving forward. So I guess I don't know if I really have a question. It's just that we are going to be studying this closely. And we just want to make sure that what you're asking is just for that particular area to the north.
What I was asking for was yes, but they're trying to make it more restrictive. Part of the reason that we agreed to that particular part of it is because that sanitary storm sewer is already in, and therefore the depth of those lots was already maintained. And if you just eyeball it, you'll see that those lots on Rocky Arbor Trail are significantly deeper than the rest of the lots, which allow us to put, you're talking about a much deeper house when you do that. So that allowed us to work that into that particular area. So when you take these small lots and now you make them, more restrictive as to how you have to place things, it just makes it difficult to put a product out to sell or for a buyer to come in and have a plan that's going to fit on their lot. It makes it more restrictive and less likely that someone's going to want to be there.
Just one other thing. So you're saying because the way the sewer configuration is there, that's the reason for this?
That sewer,
request?
yeah, the lots there were deeper due to the existing sewer configuration, and that's why I agreed to that there, because it allows for the deeper one. The rest of the lots were designed shallower, so to set that back and readjust it, it makes it, again, significantly difficult.
You don't foresee this issue coming up anywhere else in this development?
No. I would be happy just to leave it alone the way it was and just take that one right off the list.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
The next one that we had, number,
Can't close the door.
You can't close
You have to leave it open.
Then you gotta talk louder.
number 10, access to all buildings within this development from a public right-of-way is vital. It will connect users to public sidewalks throughout the development. Again, I have absolutely no problem to the commercial area. The problem is with regards to, for instance, this multifamily piece here, we can't connect all those buildings to a street sidewalk. The one that's over here, could there be a portion of the parking lot that's, all connected that goes to it? Absolutely, but to put a sidewalk in here when the road is way up here, again, from the design standpoint of it, it just doesn't make, and I said the commercial was fine. As part of the TND development, I definitely encourage that look, that storefront, that walk-on in kind of look. It's with regards to the residential aspect that, let's face it, the car is a part of our lives. They're not as small as they used to be, that we have more of them today. We're not getting rid of them. We have to attach our units, so that limits us in terms of design and what we can do. So, if they're all connected together with regards to parking lot, I think that's fine, but it's specifically that large, irregular shaped one there that to run a sidewalk throughout that whole thing is very cost prohibitive when you're already pouring all that asphalt for the parking lot.
If I may on that one, it just designates walkways, not sidewalks. So I think we had already discussed that there could be like a painted trail system tying into the trail that's required there, some sort of creative way to find a walkway, because that is a very odd shaped parcel. So it doesn't say that it has to be a concrete sidewalk. So I think that one we should be okay on.
All right. Number 12, I worked with the Bear Creek Foundation. I worked with the city. One of my issues was I can't you know, with the setback of the homes. The other one was with regards to these walking trails, that I was not going to install them or maintain them. And I said, I'll consider any reasonable requests that you want, just don't make me install these and don't make, you know, me maintain them. And some things that, in talking with the Bear Creek Preservation, they asked for this area so they can have a future parking lot there. They asked for access up in here to their future area there. I went above and beyond to accommodate their requests, anything that I possibly could. I would be happy to allow the concrete sidewalk, because I think what we're primarily talking about right now is this concrete sidewalk here. I would be happy to have it done with a building permit for occupancy, but to do it ahead of time, before anybody lives there, it's just cost prohibitive. That's my request for that one. And then for 13, which is the last one, I read this and I took it to be different, so I would like to read it out loud.
Page 12.
Page 12. So it says, concrete sidewalks shall be installed on both sides of all public streets within its PUD. Sidewalks shall be installed at the time the lots are developed and prior to receiving occupancy for a permit or as directed by the Common Council. Once the block is built up with 50% structures, the Common Council shall either order sidewalks or complete the block network. So either I'm misunderstanding, I guess the clarification, I don't want to have to put a block of sidewalks in before any homes are built, because when those concrete trucks come in, they ride over those concrete sidewalks, they break them all up, and then they have to be re-poured, which is a waste of materials. It's more stuff going into the dump. You know, I wanted to clarify with the language that I had, which said, at the time the lots are developed shall be removed. Sidewalks should be installed prior to occupancy permit provided. Additional current sidewalk languages provides that the city can come in later to complete the block if necessary. And then I also added in my paragraph that pouring sidewalks prior to construction is a waste of materials, and so forth. No builder is going to want to build in Green Bay if they have to re-pour a sidewalk.
It's not a requirement of ours.
So I misread it.
So we don't, as developed, we don't mean created.
Okay.
Once the parcel's created, you don't have to put the sidewalk.
before
in.
someone
As
moves
there's
in
a
their
development
house.
on it, and there's an occupancy permit granted, you have to have the sidewalk there.
Okay.
And then the Common Council is able to order in after 50% of a block is installed, which we also have as a caveat in our current Chapter 14. They very rarely exercise the right to do so.
So it's a misunderstanding.
I think I misunderstood it then. I was assuming the worst, I guess. Are there any questions for me?
At the present time. Thank you. Mike Metzler, did you wish to speak? No. Eric Metzler? No? And Jim and Jackie Kazeka? You did not, but you do.
1 minute,
Yes.
that's all I need, I'm not gonna talk about setbacks. I'm a bordering neighbor, and we got in the mail that, you know, if it was gonna be this meeting, we got this nice map, and I guess this is Tina's. We got another map, they don't agree. So I think the other one, maybe the city developed, but the roads don't agree. So I don't know how you make decisions.
There might be a slight variation, the updated version.
Well, you should both have the same, you gotta have, this is it, okay. The other thing is, I'm not gonna talk about who's gonna pay for this trail, but I would like the planning commission or the department to consider this. Way up here, where Huron is close to the railroad tracks, there's a trail. And it goes from, doesn't go west, it goes east from Huron, parallels the railroad tracks, and stops. Doesn't go anywhere. The city owns the land past that, behind the subdivision that's being developed. And then that land connects to the school district's property, which connects to the city property. And it would make logical sense to me to incorporate that part of a trail, build behind there and connect to this one, wherever it's gonna go. Just something for thought.
Could I ask?
Excuse me. Yes. Yes, go ahead.
I wanted actually to ask a question on the road issue of Stephanie. Is that the next item on our agenda, which involves a change to
Yes,
the roads
so
that
we
were
sent
previously
these
planned?
letters out with both items on there. So one was an existing road pattern, one was a new road pattern, which is probably where the confusion came in.
Okay.
So that'll be the next item.
Okay.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, we'll return to regular order of business. Oh, excuse me. Bill.
Bill Mindel, 125 West Mission Road. Just a quick couple of comments from the nickel seats here. I don't think that developers necessarily should get everything that they want. Projects are complicated, complex, there's a lot that goes into it, and I understand that. But I also think that the city needs to be reasonable when working with developers. Most of the people at these two tables here weren't around when this project first came up before the city council 2, 3, 4 years ago, whatever that time element was, and the developer was treated miserably by certain alders, by some the usual suspects, some not. And it was just a terrible process, and it got bounced back and forth from committee to committee to committee to committee. And I'm kind of surprised, semi-surprised in a way, that the developer didn't walk. If I heard correctly for a brief moment tonight, I heard the word walk. And I think you have to be careful about that. Last year, you had another development proposal come before here. Now, some said it wasn't serious, that it wasn't a serious proposal, but the developer insisted it was for a major hotel west of Lambeau Field in the Legends District. I'm going by memory here, but that could have been perhaps 10 stories, perhaps $14 million, something like that. It was a big deal. And the developer at that time said, and the Plan Commission had a proposal before it on a map. It was just for a map to put a road in a certain place. It didn't mean that the road was going to be built, but it just was to show it on the map. And the developer warned the commission, if you put this road even on the map, I may, or the developer actually said, I will pull out. Weeks later, the developer pulled out, and now that property is for sale. So I think you have to be very careful here when you're dealing with developers. Like I said, I don't think they should necessarily get everything they want, but at the same time, I think you need to be reasonably accommodating and to take in their considerations as well. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll return to regular order of business. Any further discussion? Yes, Commissioner Miller.
I think the couple of points of contention kind of all go back to the same thing is, how much you want to stick to the traditional neighborhood development. All the steps that were being brought up were to kind of pull it to a more traditional suburban development. So
Usual suburban development, yeah.
I guess they all kind of go back to the same thing. So do we want to continue with that direction and be a little more restricting, which is part of the traditional neighborhood development anyway? Or do we want to let this loosen up again, but the trade-off is having the suburban development that's a little more like you see all around Green Bay. So before we get into minutia of each one of these, I think that's kind of what we have to decide is how much do we want to stick to that, or are we willing to loosen up to make this more like everything else? To kind of tack onto that, this is probably the only large plot that's available in Green Bay that has this potential to be developed. would really like it to be something special that isn't Swamico, Bellevue, every other suburban area that's around here. So I would like to spend a little extra time and make sure it's something good. So I would push more for the traditional neighborhood development and those more restrictions. That being said, we certainly want to put it in a position to succeed. We don't want to have it so restrictive that, people don't want to buy the lots and they can't make it work. So I guess I'd like to stay closer to that with whatever recommendations we want to go forward with. Thank you.
I certainly endorse what Drake just said. That has been my dream for this from the beginning. I believe that's what is in our comprehensive plan, that we would go for this different kind of thing that features pedestrian rather than motor. I don't know where to cut the line. I don't know where you do the giving. I certainly think I would not put anything, I would not argue about having the flush fronts up in that northwest corner. That's not a problem to me at all. That's a minor detail, but I'm not sure about the whole rest of it as far as the garages being in front of the houses. And what I understand from Stephanie is that that is in the code and would stand. That is that the garages could not project in front of the houses.
They just have a setback right now, 20 feet setback.
Okay.
So with the allowance of the front setback as low as 10, we could create a situation in which a garage is set 10 feet back from the front of the house. That would be up to the person who's building the home to make that design call, which I don't think would anyone would do in the right mind, but that's what we have right now. Is right now across the board, it is a 20-foot setback for garages. We don't have anything that says front or behind. In any section of the PUD.
Just for clarification, when you say setback, you mean setback from the road or setback
From the right-of-way.
From the right-of-way?
Yes.
So there, in the situation you just described, there'd be a potential for the garage actually to be set back from the road 10 feet. Let's just say that's the number that is decided. And the house could be set back further from the roadway. So in other words, technically the garage could protrude from the house.
Not right now. Well, yes, right now.
It could, right now, so front yard setback in the table for single-family home, max setback is 35 feet.
Okay.
So you can put your house back 35 feet. Minimum setback is 10 feet. So, all right, you got a 25-foot garage coming out in front. Oh, but wait, garages have to be set back 20 feet from the right-of-way. So really, right now, as the zoning code stands, you build a house, you project out a garage 15 feet.
Okay.
And I think that's why we're looking at, okay, going back to the discussion of 5 foot back, flush, or if you leave it as is right now, they could project 15 feet. And that's why we're looking for a little bit of some compromise in there that, okay, maybe pushes it to 5 feet or 10 feet. But if you just left it as is, I think just to clarify that, it would, leave it on the table, it could project 15 feet. I would think in terms of what you're talking about for design and what you're looking for to get this developed here, if you want to, rank order some of these compromises, I would probably put that one on the lower end in terms of letting that one go versus some of the others that, talk about, I think if you talk about things like 12 and walking trails, I think you run the danger of setting precedent of not doing pedestrian amenities in any development moving forward. And that to me would be a much bigger policy change than just talking about design.
Now, that walking trail requirement, that's consistent for all developments of this scale?
Yes.
That's chapter 14 in our ordinance.
Okay. I'm sorry, could I ask a question to the developer? I mean, is that acceptable?
Yes.
Which of these are kind of the bigger holdup for you? The setback design of your lots or dealing with this walking path?
I'm willing to to do a compromise with the walking path if we can put them in for an occupancy permit and they can be installed like they could demand it and put it in, you know what I mean, just like the regular sidewalks, if it like took too long to be done. I'm okay with that. I really want to focus, when I think of traditional neighborhood development today, I think about walkability and services. The design part, I can't compromise with because that's the sellability of it. And if I can't sell these lots, we can't go forward and build and move forward with it because Green Bay, for me to say you have to do it like that, Green Bay doesn't take to that well. And I can't put this out there with that kind of restrictions. It's just, it cannot happen, it will not happen. But I've focused on walkability, I have focused on green space, and I've tried to take those elements into the TND as best I could. The other thing is we transferred to a planned unit development along this process for a reason. And that could be parts of the reasons that they made that transition. It is no longer considered a traditional neighborhood development. It is a planned unit development. That is how the ordinance reads. It's got traditional neighborhood elements of ones that we can do, but we can't put these design element restrictions or I won't be able to sell it.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, as long as the planning commission is willing to work with you on the design of these lots and work with you on the timing of the walking path, you would be able to work under that framework. Is that, am I understanding that correctly? So in other words, rather than having to install and maintain the walking path from the get-go, if there was some situation where it was more similar to the sidewalks where the actual installation of the paths were to occur as occupant or just prior to occupancy, you'd be willing to work with that?
I would, as long as we're only talking about this and this. You know, through here, you can't put what you're asking for in there because it's a wetland. So that was another part of the concern. And I don't want a lot of, I can understand the commercial to have the restrictions because that's a lot easier to do that. Parking and the design and the block look, it's easy to accommodate and it's going to help to give that neighborhood feel. The walkability to it, I feel, is important, but to put on a residential building, to put requirements for design on it, that is, I won't be able to sell it, so I can't agree with any restrictions with that.
Sure. Back to the, I'm sorry, I'm dominating the conversation now. Back to the planners, is that, how do we solve that problem of the wetland pond area? And it seems like we can't create a plan for that until we know more about the storm drainage. Is that accurate?
Well, once the stormwater management plan is approved and the pond locations are selected in concrete, then they have to get approval through the DNR because there's a wetland there. So you can put a trail through that area, it just depends on what material you're going to use. So that has to be agreeable. So in the next application, we have that location, materials, timing, that's all part of the plating. Right now, our Chapter 14 reads that for these trail installations, that it's done at the time that the roadways and other public infrastructures are installed with the plat. So we don't have one plat happen and the entire trail needs to be installed at that time. It's by the platting area and it's when the roads are installed. So if you wanted to change that to an occupancy thing, I agree with Director Vonk that this is a bigger discussion then, because if we're going to give leniency for one developer, I think we need to look at the code in its entirety, which has already been under review and is under review. But I agree that these sort of infrastructure needs need to be directed and installed at the same time that the roads are installed to assure that they're done correctly.
What level of development is required under the code for that walking path? I mean, does it just need to be essentially set aside, or do the final materials need to be laid?
It has to be installed at the time the road is installed. So the materials and all of that is detailed in Chapter 14. It's also discussed with the Parks Department. They have a lot of say in this kind of thing because they take over the maintenance once it's installed and dedicate it over to the city. So if they're going to look at this and say, asphalt's required here, concrete's required here, a boardwalk is required here, we'd have to get DNR concurrence because of the wetland, but then, you know, there's discussions to be had. It's not just set in stone. You have to do this one particular thing across the board for every development. There's a lot of leeway because Parks is going to maintain it, so they want to make sure they have a say on the materials as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think to that point, two things. One, trying to do the timing with the other infrastructure is important in terms of an efficiency of what, you bring in an asphalt for roads and other things, so you do it at that particular point. But then, I think in terms of the cost, yes, there is a cost to the developer for doing the trail, but it's done in consultation with parks, because then it gets turned over and it's a public amenity for the long-term maintenance. So I think in terms of what, someone was saying in terms of the design, materials and things like that, Parks doesn't want to sign up for something that's going to be a pain in the butt to maintain for perpetuity.
Sure.
And I think that's what they're trying to get towards is, all right, here's something, and again, it's not putting it at day one, because, okay, if there's somebody living there, who's going to be using it? So, but when there's streets there, that means occupancy, and that's what we found through that chapter, is that's the appropriate timing for that. You got others in the back.
Alderman Dwayne.
Yeah, we keep talking about the ordinances, but under these PUDs, if I'm not correct, you can change any part of that ordinance that you wish. That's why you're here for a PUD. The restricted part of it. This trail that we're talking about, they're donating this land to the city, and the park's just gonna take over it. You can make it to where the city pays half of it, they pay half of it. You can put it in there, they don't have to pay any of it. This is what the PUD's here for. You can make any changes you want in that. You keep saying this is ordinance number 14 and whatever numbers you give up, but you have an opportunity to make any decision you want. I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Yes.
I'm Dave Boyce from 123 South Quincy. And when you put in sidewalks, if it's required to have a sidewalk there before you put the unit up, is it possible to have a deviation where you could just have a gap where the trucks could go through, and then once the structure is built, then you could fill in that one gap? That would save you from destroying the sidewalk.
That would be the driveway. We had a house that was like that. They put the sidewalk in, they didn't put the driveway in.
Yes.
Didn't you say it's not required to put the sidewalks in before it's built?
That's correct.
Okay, so that isn't even an issue.
So that's taken
Okay,
care of.
off the table. Okay, thank you. That's what I thought I understood.
But that was a good point.
It wasn't.
Yes.
And your comment is just what I wanted to get at this point. We had at the beginning 6 points at issue. One for sure, that is number 13, has been taken off. That was based on a misunderstanding, and we've got clarity on that. I want to acknowledge that I have been thinking of this as a traditional neighborhood development rather than a PUD, and I appreciate you reminding us of the change that was made along the way in that. I'm also sorry that you only received this information so shortly before this meeting. I think it's very, very complicated and has been hard for all of us to deal with. My general feeling is that the walkability is more important than the setbacks. And I would be very happy if we could have some more work done between the developer and the staff to maximize the flexibility when it comes to the setbacks and minimize the departure from the traditional neighborhood development when it comes to the walkability, that is trails and sidewalks. So that's how I would kind of sort things out. What would you hold on to and what would you be willing to give on?
Well, it seems to me that, those issues, those 5 issues that are there, that we could discuss each one of those and try to see what sort of compromises can be reached. Like I look at number 5, and there are different ways you could deal with that. You could reduce the number of units per acre. You could deal with whether there should be an attached garage or not. there are different ways to deal with that, and I'm not sure what's suggested here, and what would be put on the table in terms of a compromise, but it seems to me there's more than one way to skin a cat, if you will.
Even
Pardon the pun.
a half a dozen cats, yeah.
I guess my biggest concern at this point is, what do we really have to vote on at this point? Because it seems like we don't really have a firm proposal. We do have the staff's proposal, but if I'm understanding the developer correctly, accepting the staff's proposal would close the development from going forward. Just so we can draw a clear line in the sand here, if I'm understanding that correctly. And I'd hate to see that happen. You also don't want to see this continued in perpetuity. So I don't know what we have to vote on at this point.
Well, I think, we're in a balance right now of expediency, per the request of the developer, to be able to get some certainty with being able to move forward and be able to really, plat this land in order to develop and or sell the property. They need to have a PUD governing it so that, somebody can work and do a development on it. So until we have that, right now, the existing PUD doesn't work, or there's a lot more hurdles to go through in order to get something through. One of the major ones being, you need a stormwater management plan for the entire 3 phases.
Sure.
So I think of that, one of the things right now to deal with that stormwater plan is a critical issue and helps move that forward more quickly in order to deal with that.
Do it by phases, you mean?
Correct.
I think that's also basically settled, it seems to me.
Correct. I think we're down to it, and whether you want to hash it out now, which I think we have. I think, as was mentioned previously, 13, we've come to some understanding on that. I think 10, we have come to some understanding with that, being that the discrepancy being, look, you don't have to put in a full sidewalk, but you can provide, a 5-foot striping on your asphalt that's meant for pedestrians, and that there's ways you don't have to necessarily build new curb and gutter and sidewalk and things like that. And I think there's some understanding on that there's not a whole separate concrete system that has to be built. So long as there's a quote-unquote way for a pedestrian to get through that area. I think the biggest issues that we're dealing with, and maybe it's looking at, trying to figure out some sort of compromise here, deals with, on that page 12, and that's the precedent for the trails. And I think as Alder Dwayne had said, this is a PUD, and we can do things where we do things differently because of the size and scale of development. I will just put out as a precaution, if we do it here in this PUD, I think you will have a clamoring for doing it in Chapter 14 as well down the road. And that is not just for this development, but for other developments, that in terms of that cost falling on the city versus the developer. Part of it's part of the development cost, and it gets passed on to the lots. But again, I think with the PUD, there's room for that conversation. But then the other ones really have to do with the, kind of the 2 design issues, I think, in 5 and 7. I think as Alder Netting had said, what do you want to offer something up in terms of, the compromise to reducing the density there, from 10 down to 8 to allow for some more, or for, allowing for detached garages so long as the, units face the street. Or, holding tight. I think going back to with 7 and the setbacks, I think from just a departmental staff perspective, I understand the transition from the traditional neighborhood development to this PUD and where it's at right now. In terms of, as Ms. Bunker had said, the things that are going to draw out here are amenities and services, and, I would look at holding tighter on some of those pedestrian circulation things, and you know, those types of things before looking at maybe design standards for single-family houses.
Did she say something?
If I may, that lowering the density, like you said, they traded properties, they traded stuff so they get a higher density in the last PUD. I mean, that's, when they put this together, it was because they wanted more density to put these projects in there, so that wouldn't work out, I guess. Well,
If I could, please, in respect for the neighbors that asked for the attached garages, I would not want to see that taken out in respect for the neighbors. And with regards to the density, 20% green space was donated as part of this, and the trade-off for that is a higher density. So now you want to have me donate all the green space, but not allow the density on top of it. That doesn't all come together fairly for the developer.
Ms. Bunker, can you tell me where, on what section, so this, if we're talking about the multifamily, there's not a ton of public frontage for your multifamily parcels. Is that correct? I mean, the one on the upper left, I mean, in phase one, really there's some, there's a little bit of frontage along Erie and there's a little bit of frontage along Rocky Harbor.
Sure, but when our buyer went in to meet with Ms. Hummel, she, for the most part, gave him a hard time about that orientation, is from what I understand, which is why I was trying to clarify this primarily for him.
Okay. I mean, there is some frontage, I mean, because really, I mean, are we looking, and give me a little more clarity here, in terms of this right-of-way frontage, we're dealing really only with like the public right-of-way.
This is only for public right-of-way, and we understand the constraints of that site because this is how this was laid out before any of us decided this was a good plat of land to have. Obviously, this is a very odd shape. It does not have much public frontage. The discussions that were had with the developer who was looking at this site mostly pertain to the fact that there are overhead lines that also go over that site. There are buckets of issues with this site, really, once we go into it. But we want to still have, if there is an ability to have something face a public frontage so people know what development they're coming into, that's always going to be preferred. That doesn't mean that you can't turn it to the side and have a sign there. That's ultimately what we had discussed. There was no bullying of a developer in order to make them change the direction of their parcels because you're really limited with those overhead lines where you can put them anyway. You can only have parking under those overhead lines.
So I'm trying to get through in terms of application for the multifamily, this, in terms of the design about, you know, the requirement that 3BF. Really looking at a structure that is up against a public street. Is that correct?
Yes.
So for those buildings interior, they could have the garage as a quote-unquote front door if they're just on a driveway or private measure.
So for the multifamily, it's on the northeast corner.
Yep.
Obviously, the lower part of that is all interior. It doesn't face any public frontage.
So that could all have garage front doors?
Yes, same with the parcel that's on the lower right-hand corner. That doesn't
Off-road
have
D?
public frontage either.
Okay, so really we're talking about the parcel on Rocky Harbor and Grandview, that anything up against those, aligned with those streets, would have to have a real
Face frontage.
front door. Okay. I mean, is that your understanding? That
Yes, and it's particular the one, well, I thought there was discussion with the developer that there was concerns with how he was orientating his building inside of the parcel, which was the concern that was relayed to me. True or not, I apologize if I have misinformation. My main concern is really with that one next to the existing park, because it's on a corner, it's nearly impossible to get those, on those end units there, you're not gonna be able to get those garages. You know, a building is square for the most part when it comes to an apartment. And with it being on a corner like that, I'm not gonna be able to orientate it the way you want to and be able to get those garages attached. And I don't wanna detach the garages out of respect for the neighbors. I think that's good to help to keep the values up, you know, in the property as well.
So I mean, primarily talking about that top north property where it's.
That is the biggest concern.
The corner of Rocky Arbor.
As long as we're on the same page that the multifamily parcel A only has to worry about the two little parts where it touches the road directly, then it's the one next to the park there where I can't come up with something that isn't terribly restrictive on that parcel.
So what your layout right now then, if this restriction wasn't there, what would your proposal be?
Well, I would say, honestly, I would look, I mean, we all want something that looks nice. I don't think anyone wants something that looks ugly, but, you know, when it comes to multifamily development, I mean, they're trying to maximize, you know, the number of units on there, and the units all have to be attached. There's a variety of ways of doing it. You know, some look better than others, and I just don't want to restrict it so that different roof lines and so far make it cost prohibitive or not feasible or significantly reduces the density. I personally just don't want to restrict the design of any residential component.
Okay. So I think, and look, planning commission can decide what it wants on the single family garages. I think, again, from the planning perspective, what's important in terms of you know, the code and planning principles is, we went through this with, I believe, Uncle Mike's a few months ago, building out at Mason and Challenger. And I think one of the things that we looked at is, you know, providing, that is a very prominent corner, and eventually this will be a prominent corner, and that what you'd want on that corner is some type of structure, some type of building, some type of front door on that corner. And I think that's what, in terms of these, you know, guidelines for that, is that's what we're looking for at the corner of Rocky Arbor and South Grandview. And I think in terms of, okay, as you go further up Grandview, and I don't know the dimensions of that lot in terms of where you're going to be pushing, you know, I guess in terms of how that's going to lay out, I think when you go up on that corner, it's important to have that street frontage on that particular corner. And I guess I'm just trying to talk through in terms of your design plan for that. Are you looking at how many units are you going to be able to fit in there, and why there can't be a, I guess, quote unquote, front door facing those streets where you can still, you know, drive in
Because
to
you
the
have to
back?
have garages with it. And, you know, when you think about, when I think about nice layouts that I've seen for multifamily buildings, you basically have garages all around the perimeter so that you can attach them in. Those are the nice units, the high-end units that are selling right now. They have garages more or less on all sides. So to have to designate a part of it as not having that just for the sake of the road being there, it significantly hampers the design and what ultimately can be built in that multifamily. I mean, you're significantly limiting it.
And you're saying that's primarily because now you can't build back to back.
Not even back to back, just think about it. If you have to attach your garage, right? You're gonna, and you have to have access to each unit, and you want something that has more of an immediate direct access to it, your garages are gonna be next to the entrance. Well, if you've got 8 units, they're gonna be all in front of it. That's just the way these attached units work, so that people can drive right in there. I mean, it's the way the design is today of what sells well, of what leases at a high rate, and what's, you know, attractive to the tenants. It may not be the vision that you have for this particular project, but I think with the narrowness of the site, for one, the size of the site being smaller, we have to allow flexibility for what's being built there.
And I think that's where we're trying to, I guess this compromise is for these public streets, is having that front, quote-unquote, front door facade, but the interior, the 8-plex, the 12-plex, you know, having those back-to-back garages, it doesn't, I guess, matter in a sense in terms of, you know, that street frontage. And I don't know in terms of like other situations, because those garages, they're not going to be going directly to the street. right? I mean, you're not gonna pull out your garage and go directly onto Erie. I mean, it's all internal
They
circulation.
could potentially. I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't
I don't
potentially.
think DPW would allow that many driveway cuts. on
Okay,
a
well,
road.
that's a good reason not to.
Okay.
And reasonable too. I mean, I consider that reasonable. It's a very narrow site. And, you know, the locations of these things, the locations of where these were put also had to do with a lot of different discussion. I mean, would I have rather put that somewhere else? Perhaps, but it's just the size that laid out because of things that were moved around, frankly, so many different times to try to accommodate the residents. And now what's left is difficult to work with the restrictions that are on it. That's really what it comes down to.
How many individual lots do you see this being a problem for on this layout?
It's just the multifamily, so it's really just that one up there.
When you say that, would you mind going and pointing, just, I'm having a hard time getting my head around what one.
Yep, what one is that one?
Okay, so this one right here, the depth of this is only like 350 feet.
Okay.
And the length of it is like, it might even only be like 250, let's say, by like 700. So it's a very narrow space. The garages all need to be attached, okay? And I agree with that, and that's something that out of respect for the neighbors, I don't want to take that away.
Sure.
So it's just limited of what you can do, because you have to have no garages right here, and you have to have no garages right here.
So you're talking about the orange space at the top there?
This brown one right
Right,
here,
yeah,
yes.
brown, yeah.
This one is kind of hidden back there. It's not really a big deal, as long as there's no, requirement, which we've clarified with. This one, that doesn't have much. And this one, you're also changing the zoning that I have here, which I'm really not in favor of that. And there's a flag lot here, and there's a flag lot here, and I would prefer just to leave this the way it was. And I forgot about that until I walked up here right now. So, but that wouldn't be a problem for this multifamily either. It's really just this one, where I've got road on two sides. I want to attach those garages. When you're paying for an attached garage, you want something that's close to your unit, you'll be able to walk in the door, so then you need to put the garages around the perimeters of the building.
I think one of the things, and maybe we dealt with this issue, kind of similar narrow lot on the Friar House Flats over at St. Mary's of the Angels. And we're dealing with there, I mean, look, the ability to want to preserve that fence, that landscaping, and in order to, I guess in that case, fit into the neighborhood and not move that. I guess that's just an example of a product where, look, then all the stuff is backloading from that driveway and the side. And I think that's in terms of, the product that you can build there. Yes, it's different maybe than the traditional project with the garages all around, but also just, it's not impossible to build a product with that just has garages on one side. Just for those public fronting spaces, all the interior stuff can still have that, I guess, double fronting garage.
So is there a way to craft, I'm sure there is a way, but is there a practical way to craft language in this PUD to just treat that block, the one problematic block, differently to accommodate what the developer needs here and not compromise the traditional neighborhood or the rest of the development? Is there a way to do that as far as the planners view this?
There is, but given the existing map and the locations of the multifamily, it really only affects that northern one. So
Right.
if we strike it from that, we should really just strike it from the entire PUD, because it isn't entirely useful, because the other ones are flag shaped. And trust me, if I were the one creating this PUD, I would have never done that, because I also divide the land here, and it drives me bonkers that there are 3 flag shaped lots in this, but they're there, so we're dealing with them. But if we're going to relax it for the northern multifamily, it should just be struck entirely. I think so.
So striking it entirely really only impacts that one section at the top.
Yes, unless somebody wanted to come in and put a multifamily with the back facing the road on Rocky Arbor and this top left one,
Mhm.
which isn't feasible at all. Nobody would do a design like that.
Yeah.
I mean, if you wanted to keep this in here just in case somebody was crazy and wanted to do that, you could, but I don't foresee that being an issue.
Well, if I can question, on the northern multifamily lot, on a lot of modern attached garage multifamilies, they'll have side loads, but the front and the two long ends will be entryways. And
Correct.
coming off the
And
sides.
it has to be it has to be horizontal on there because of the shape of it. We can't put it this way. We have to put it the long way, because otherwise you'll only get two buildings on the site there. Because those buildings are gonna line up east to west.
Those buildings are lining up east to west. How many?
I don't know, I'm not, building it, I'm just saying, if you try to lay that out on there, it's not gonna work out I know it's not gonna work to meet your standards.
But I guess going there then would only not meet the standards if you're laying, let's just say, 8-plex, 12-plex, whatever it is, if you're laying those out kind of stacked, so the buildings run east to west, and you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those ends really don't have garages on. Those ends on Grandview wouldn't have garages, so in that sense, they meet the code, right? If there's not a garage door on Greenbrier, that's meeting the code.
You'd have to line them north and south, and you would have no garages on Greenbrier, but you would on
You would on Rocky Arbor.
Rocky Arbor, yeah. You'd have one or two sets, depending on how many, if you could fit two.
And I'm just talking through out loud here that long-term Grandview is probably it's not an arterial, but it's probably the collector street in that neighborhood, correct?
It is.
So again, I guess in a spirit of compromise is keeping that thing for the multifamily. Can we keep that, I don't know, the DPW classifications to collector streets? And that is, look, so for that little spot on Erie Road and for Green, I don't know, it's the name of subdivision, I don't know why I can't say it. Greenbrier, probably because talking about Aurora. But about Grandview, if that's in place, really then, okay, you're stacking those buildings, they're running east to west, so it's an end cap more or less. I mean, you're just looking at the side of a building as you go up and down Grandview, so that those garages are in Rocky Arbor, which is more of a local street. I think in terms of just, working towards a compromise of, again, fitting with that dispute over the T&D versus PUD here, keeping that intact for at least what Grandview and Erie, I think accomplishes that, because that's got the longer frontage versus going on Rocky Arbor. And is that something that works?
I like to be less restrictive, period.
I'm just trying to make a deal. I mean, and in the essence of time, I mean, we could, I don't want to, but I mean, I think there's an opportunity to sit and hold this for 2 weeks. But I mean, we've been talking long enough, and I don't think you want to do that. And I think there's an opportunity that we're very close here. I mean, ultimately, it's this plan commission's recommendation and council's decision, what it goes. I mean, if you want to kick the can to council, we could. I mean, we'll just have that same conversation.
And you think to some extent, for the goals of passersby on that street, you don't see a bunch of garages, not to mention it can't load onto that street anyway, if that does probably make sense. That collector street would not have a garage, basically.
And that's what I'm, I guess, recommending here, that you've kind of got that commercial corridor now. You got your commercial to the south, you've got some houses that as you keep going up Grandview there, you wouldn't be looking at a bunch of garages.
Better look.
You'd be looking down the aisles, correct. So I don't know if there's a way to capture that in the...
Of course there is.
I mean, there's obviously no language, but for, on those, whether collector streets or if you just want to call out Erie and Grandview. Because, right, most of the commercial is already on Grandview.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So can we just call out that this applies to Erie and Grandview?
Sure.
Okay. I mean, again, that's you and I mean, these guys have to vote on it here.
That works for me as well.
I'm at the point where I think we have had as much discussion as we can here and probably a little bit more than we should have. And I would be very happy if the staff and the developer work together to find the compromises that are doable on the points that we have not yet been able to pin down. And if we ourselves recommend this in concept with that provision.
And I think the last sticking point here is probably
The
trail,
Sidewalks and the trails.
which should really, I mean, probably be I would say a council decision in terms of, I mean, it's impacting parks and DPW and other departments
That's right.
that,
That's right.
in terms of the design and other guidelines, I think we've handled.
Yep.
So how can we get this to council for the next meeting? I mean, because we're not putting it off again for another plan, right?
Sure.
Okay.
No, not putting it off.
Okay.
My proposal would be that I will move that we approve this in concept with the understanding that the sense of this discussion will be the underlying basis for the staff and the developer to work out the remaining questions.
Okay, so I have numbers 5, 7, and 12 that have yet to be hashed out. So you're putting those items on staff and developers for the next week to determine.
That's what I'm doing.
I think five we hashed out.
I think, yeah.
5, instead of having that multifamily struck, that's where we just said
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Erie,
So it's done,
and
so it's just 7 and
Glenview.
7 and
7 and
12.
For
12.
the multi.
And then whatever you all come up with goes to common council.
Gotcha.
Well, the problem is the
That's-
council meeting's on Monday, so it doesn't
Yep.
really give a
Doesn't
whole lot
give
of
a lot
time
of
here.
time.
There'd have to be
Okay.
But I think it's
discussions in
going
the
to be a
next,
more productive
in the
discussion.
next few
here.
I mean,
days.
7, I got the feeling like
It's pretty much there. But
that we were not going to
Right.
do that.
Me too, I got that feeling. We're not-
But I don't want to speak for anyone.
We were not going to do what?
That, in 7, their request, that staff recommended not honoring the request about the setbacks and doing the 5-foot garage setback. But I got the inclination here that based on the current zoning table, we would just allow, that current zoning table, which would allow for a 15-foot garage projection from the house, maximum, more or less.
Right.
Yes,
That's what we're talking about.
yes, yes.
That's what she asked for.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, so it
Okay.
sounds like that got ironed out.
So basically, it's just,
I'm
I think
sorry,
it's
can I
number
clarify?
12.
Do you want to keep the language as it is now, or do you want to add her provision that there should be no setback, anything?
There's some table that has to be changed. I think.
Neither one. It goes back to the city ordinances, right? Isn't that what you just proposed, Kevin?
Is that what the table is?
The table as it reads now would allow for that 15-foot maximum between garage and front of building.
is that,
Because there's a 20-foot required setback.
Right. That's what I understood, yes from this group
Yes.
and yes from the
Maximum of
Yes, from the
15
yep.
projection and could potentially go all the way to a 5-foot setback? Is that how it would read?
As it reads right now, it's 15 is allowed maximum because we allow the 35-foot setback, 20 minimum for garage.
But what's the range? I'm sorry, just
Oh, so the,
maximum 15 projection, it could go back as far as.
go back to my house.
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I can't get in the rear setback, which is inconsequential.
Right. And obviously, the planners are comfortable with just relying on the typical ordinances. That's less of a change, it's no change, correct? No change from the city, from the ordinances as they exist.
Yes, so if you want to add her language, it's there shall be no requirement that the garage of any residential home be set back from the main house. That would be adding new language that says we can't impose any type of a setback, which then negates our zoning code.
I don't think that's what was being
Or,
proposed.
Just talking
that's what
about-
was proposed by the developer.
Right, yeah, but I don't
But
think that's what
discussed here?
we're, yeah.
So then the table would remain as is.
The table is
No,
as is.
There's no
Text.
extra regulation
No
either way.
language one way or the other.
It's back to the zoning
table.
code.
Gotcha.
Does that work for the developer as well?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
And for number 12, I'll roll my dice with the council, so we don't need to discuss it.
Okay.
okay. So is that a motion then?
I had made a motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to do what we just said we were going to do.
It's all recorded.
Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Yes, Alderman.
Just to clarify, I just want to make sure that what's coming forward to council, sounds like we've been negotiating the whole time period right here. So we're pretty well happy with, yes.
With most of it, yeah.
Yes, just with my own clarification.
Other than the trail thing.
It's going to go on paper with the staff
Yes.
and in conversation with the developer.
If there is better language that can be developed to make things perfectly clear, you know, by all means, bring it forward to council and we'll deal with it.
Yeah, I will make the edits to the draft document before it makes its way to council.
Yeah. We still have other items on the agenda, but we've taken care of this
Let's
one.
move on to number 8, right, because that's kind of the same. Item 8, consideration with possible action on the request to amend the future road pattern for the Grandview Place Development, ADP 129.
Thank you. So for this portion of the request, we're just looking at the road layout for it. So when we receive this map, this is obviously what we've been looking at the whole time, which shows zoning, land use, but also shows where the roads are going to go and where the trail systems are going to go as well. So the ADP needs to reflect where we have an approximation for where the roads will go, so that way people are unable to pull building permits for those areas. Same thing with trail systems. We want to make sure people are not putting infrastructure in places that we need for a trail. So throughout looking at this, there's been a lot of discussions with our Department of Public Works about the stormwater management and the phasing of that. So again, the watershed discussion comes back in. How quickly are we willing to approve these things? At what pace should we be doing that? And how does that affect the future development of this area? So between discussions with that, we received the proposal for the full area. What we are proposing to accept would be the area that is north of Copper Falls Way, which is here. This area in, and then this area in. So this entire area, that we would accept that portion of the official map amendment. This area has been delineated by the DNR, has been reviewed by our Department of Public Works. These roads are pretty much set. There might be some different changes in the curves once the curve data is determined for this road, but ideally, most of this would stay the same. Rocky River Trails where that sewer line goes through, so there won't be any changes with that. Copper Falls Way is the main east-west arterial through this development, so we don't anticipate changes with that either. So the official map for this area is pretty well determined based on the fact that the wetlands and the stormwater management plan can be fairly easily approved. Yes, and it also goes with the phasing options that we have here. So this would basically follow that phase 1 would be eligible to have the plating done, the stormwater management done, and then the official map is completed. So what we have is some of the conditions on here are things that the Department of Public Works wanted us to add, just to make sure that there was clarification between ourselves and the developer about what's going to be expected. So we are looking to do, again, the phase stormwater management plan, which would then inform the next sessions of OMA applications where they do the other phases. Once those things are delineated, we can determine if there are navigable waterways or if the stormwater management locations need to be amended and therefore the roadway is moved. The other thing that we have in here is condition number 2, that the north-south trail on the west side of this development, which is the trail we've been discussing tonight, that it must remain. So that the location as it was originally intended, as in the north-south connection that we have going, and the materials will be agreed upon with the city during the plating process. So this is just to basically avoid having a really big discussion about really boring things at Plan Commission. So we want to make sure that the Parks Department, Department of Public Works, Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, and then the Planning Department are all on board with the location and the materials, as well as make sure the developer is comfortable with those things, because at this point they do install for this. We also have the provision that the formal stormwater management plan needs to be prepared and address a number of things. This is pretty standard language and is also taken care of during the plating process. Again, with the right-of-way widths, that's pretty standard that we check those things during the plating process as well, and that the curve patterns are looked at only because we're not sure of the curve pattern on that road A as it's proposed. So basically, as long as they conform with the rest of our municipal code, we are comfortable with approving the official map amendment north of Copper Falls Way.
Yes, Commissioner Berman.
Point 3 on the formal stormwater management plan. I take it that means at the end of that whole sentence, for each phase as it develops?
Well, this approval is only for that northern portion, so we
Okay,
just need
so
this for
all
that
of
northern
this
portion.
just re-
Yeah, I imagine we would have a
all
similar
phase one.
condition for the next time they come back with an official map amendment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And again, we do have interested parties. No one wanted to speak. Do I hear a motion to open the floor?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the regular order of business. All approved? Or all?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Ms. Bunker, do you wish to speak on this?
If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
But otherwise,
If you
Okay.
have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
are there any questions? Again, yes, Alderman Steuer?
Yes, thank you. You know, just, well, when I was talking to Alderman Dwayne about that, just looking at the road pattern on this, I just noticed the road to the north. Is this something with the DNR, that there's an issue as far as trying to complete that road pattern?
Yes, ma'am. They will not allow the crossing within the wetland. Even though the utilities are currently underneath it, the DNR is not allowing the road to go over it. However, there is pending legislation with the state right now that potentially that could fix that, which is why we're doing the phasing stormwater so that in the event we can block it back off and go with that sewer that's there, you know, we could potentially.
I don't know, I just was looking at that very tiny segment there. Is that just more for delineation? This one right here?
That is like a little piece of the road that is like, you know.
I'm just trying to understand why
Yeah, I
it's-
don't know why that's there like that. I think the pink is the road, so I think it just.
It's probably just a mapping error.
I think so. I
I
don't.
used to draw maps, so I'm sensitive.
You can go redraw that one if you want to. I'd be happy to have you.
Thanks.
Mr. Yeah. Mr. Greca, did you want to speak? No? Okay. Mr. Metzler? I guess I
Give that.
Okay, with that, we'll return to regular order of business. Yes, Commissioner Burnham.
And the question that was raised about the roads earlier comes up now. Are you proposing this change?
That is the,
The new,
that is the existing.
this is the existing, but it has two cul-de-sacs in the right upper quadrant that don't show anywhere else, and that's,
Right there.
yes.
So this is reflective of that. So that's our existing development plan, existing roadway. And then when you
Okay.
switch it over, we lose one of those cul-de-sacs as a curved road.
And this is what we're building on, this is what's being proposed now?
Yes.
Thank you. I thought it was vice versa, so I'm glad I asked.
It's cul-de-sacs.
Any further discussion? The chair would entertain a motion.
Move to approve the recommendations.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the recommendation. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Are we ready for 4 yet?
Yes.
Okay.
There's no one here for 9, so.
Okay. Item 4. Thank you. Consideration with possible action on the request to create a planned unit development at 3065 Citrus Street, submitted by Joel Erfer, Rockport Engineering and Surveying LLC, on behalf of Dan Schmidt, property owner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, this is a very large lot, it's a 25-acre parcel that is currently developed at about a little over 3 acres. Property owner is coming forward to do a planned unit development, basically to expand both his personal residence as well as the related accessory structures on the site and the accessory uses on the site, which include an outdoor water park and primarily collector vehicle storage. The owner has been before the Board of Appeals a couple times, as well as the Plan Commission, primarily for variations to the height of accessory structures and the area of accessory uses. And then I believe he came back for an extension of the CUP just recently. So this is the site, as you can see. It's just east of the highway. Again, a very, very large acre site. It's got a main entrance off of Sitka, leads up to the house. And there's right now a service drive that's a little bit further west. Comprehensive plan recommends low-density residential for not just this site, but the entire area. And the zoning is also reflective of that, being R1. Now what's unique with the site, again, it's 25-acre site. It's not a typical R1 lot. The existing proposed principal and accessory uses are quite large. But again, it's a very, very large lot. If I kind of go forward, this is the layout of the lot as it's existing, and also some of the proposed accessory buildings and accessory uses. Let me kind of go forward here. So what you see in orange is existing principal uses. Now the two shapes up on the upper left are the upper stories, but everything else is at ground level. The blue is the existing attached accessory structures, and what's being shown here in green is proposed attached and detached accessory structures. So you can see they're quite large, but not necessarily when compared to the lot. So you look at the lot size at 25 acres, it's very large. Going to the Board of Appeals multiple times kind of put some pressures on them. The code, again, as I had mentioned, is not really designed for, I think it's been referred to as an estate lot. Some communities do have an estate zoning because of the size and just the scope of the development. It was felt all around by staff, by the Board of Appeals, that a planned unit development would be the best way to go. So what you have in your packet is a planned unit development for this site as developed and as proposed. Again, as I had mentioned, primary items in here would be a second access point, a permanent second access point to the west of the existing, would allow for some setback variations for the water park, but primarily for the front yard setback, which is being increased to 500 feet to allow protection for the front of the property to be future subdivided, and then allowing additional accessory attached and detached accessory structures as far as sizes go within the PUD. Those are really the big points of the planned development. Again, it's kind of the classic case why you need a planned development. The use, the lot itself is a good use. It's a great lot, but the code was just not designed for anything of this size or this scope. So we are recommending approval of the request, subject to the proposed planned unit development ordinance.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am the alderman of that district. I had many conversations with neighbors. They had concerns and stuff like that. As you can see, they are not here right now. After they saw what was being asked for and the size and what this gentleman has done, I mean, it's just a beautiful lot, beautiful home. They didn't have a problem with it. All the questions were answered. Like I said, they're not here. I told them I would be here to discuss anything they wanted to. They were all satisfied, and I too would, as their alderman, support this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we do have interested parties. We have a motion and a second.
I move to suspend the rules to hear from interested parties.
Second.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to suspend the rules. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Joel Erfurth?
Hi, I'm Joel Erfurth from Mach 4 Engineering, representing Dan Schmidt. This is Steve Klesick, he's the architect, also representing Mr. Schmidt. I brought some stuff, basically just bigger versions of what's in your pack in case your eyesight's like mine. But some of you will probably recognize it. It's a fairly unique project to say the least. Came before you folks for a conditional use permit earlier, about a year ago, about to allow, to see if we could get to exceed the height of the accessory use. That was primarily related to that false rock work in the pool area. We also had to get a couple of zoning ordinance, or zoning variances, primarily related to allow the structural, the accessory use to exceed the principal use of the building. As the project got underway, I think we came before you guys a couple of months ago, it was already, to extend the conditional use because this project developed, became apparent that we weren't going to get it done in the 12-month period that we had, or 13-month period. And the nature of that project, where we have to work essentially east to west to back our way out of it, you were kind enough to grant that extension. So that whole thought process kind of spawned Mr. Schmidt to think a little bit more that once you're back your way out of that corner, you've backed your way out of that corner and you're probably not going back in. So to that end, started to propose, some other, some additional accessory use. I hesitate to call them garages because these are, they're very nice facilities. I mean, this is not...
Nicer than my house.
Yeah, this is not my garage. This is, a very nice...
Vintage cars.
Yeah. But at the same time...
More expensive than my house.
From a planning perspective or a code perspective, it's a garage by code. So hence, we came back for the variance board to see if we could get the same variance we got the year before, and that's when they said, probably should back up and do a PUD. So that brought us forward here today. Nothing has really changed other than up in that upper right-hand corner, we propose to build one more collector garage and then have this PUD set so that should Mr. Schmidt ever decide in the future to do an additional garage either on that northeast corner or potentially out in front, that he could do that. So the PUD primarily marries well with your code with the exception of 3 items. One is a privacy wall. Given that this is a fairly unique project, trying to discourage an attractive nuisance, we'd like to request that we could go from an 8-foot, which is allowed by code, to a 10-foot privacy wall, just to keep, you have to be a damn near mountain goat to, or have a death wish on a bike to get in behind there, because it's quite steep going down to Bears Creek, but just to keep anyone, you'd hate to have someone come in and rummage around in there. So increase that wall height. Second thing would be to allow the accessory uses to exceed the principal use, which we talked about, as Mr. Buck went into a little bit. Given the size of the lot, I think a typical R1 zoning, you're allowed up to 50% impervious, if I'm not mistaken. We're at 10 even with all this. I mean, so what the PUD will allow up to 15%, which actually the PUD is written to allow up to 45%, which would be a tremendously large structure, which it would probably, I can't imagine it ever going anywhere near that. 15 would give quite a bit of additional space even. And then allow construction of a second entrance. As you can imagine, with all the mechanical equipment and so forth associated with, there's a in the basement of this facility, there's like a kind of an access or maintenance well that if a pump would go out, they typically pull those up at like a little jib crane on a truck. So rather than have
pool chemicals.
Yeah, pool chemicals, just stuff that you don't want necessarily coming in your front door. It's all stamped concrete. I don't know if you've seen the photos, like air photo. It's incredibly attractive driveway. You don't want that kind of stuff running on there. It's large enough property. We could meet the separation distances of the driveway, so thought it made sense to request that we could have a second maintenance driveway installed to the west there. I guess that to that end, I guess unless you have something kind of open up to questions, I think you guys have seen the project. This is just kind of the next step, I guess, if you will.
Hopefully the final step.
Hopefully the final step. We're trying to do the PUD, so we'd have to come back for you every year.
I had a couple of questions, if I could. The proposed future drive and the future collection garage in the front there, are we approving those as part of the PUD, or is that just something for the future?
The driveway, yes.
The drive.
Yeah, I mean
But
that one, the cross one.
Oh, no, that's not even currently being proposed. That would be down the road.
So what we were asked to do by staff is to say, all right, you don't want to review one of these for us every year. So think about everything that Mr. Schmidt might want to do and put it on the plan so that you can review it, staff can look at it, and so we thought that we attractively connected these two drives and put a potential collection garage out here. That's all that it is it's on a drawing. No one has asked us to design it. No one's asked us to put the road in. But in lieu of 10 years from now, somebody wanting to do something, then at least there's a plan.
Right, and it would be included in the PUD as something, if they came in to pull the permits to do it, it would then meet the zoning.
So we would be in effect approving it.
Correct.
What we're proposing to construct right now is that far western,
Right.
which
This one.
is currently is a service road right now for the construction activities.
Just out of curiosity, are the large stones, rocks that are along that service road right now, are those going to be used for the pool construction, or are they going to?
They were removed from what was a waterfall.
Oh.
And there's not an intention to use them, so they're probably gonna be put into some landscaping, or they were just left over from the demolition of an old waterfall.
Okay, just curious. Thank you.
Could you lead me around the exterior walls and what they are made of this fortress?
Sure, I can do that. So the masonry wall would start here.
And that's the one here.
Which is this.
And
Yeah.
that's the one you're asking for that.
Yeah, and I think the one on your packet might even be better looking, because we made it better looking. We put Fond du Lac stone on it, we've got brick on it, we've got limestone on it.
It's really pretty.
Pretty attractive. So that starts here with a gate, and then it goes around the water features until the gate here. So it's this, or from this point to this point. The remaining fence is more of a deer fence, I would call it. It's a black aluminum vertical, it looks like wrought iron, so it's attractive, but it's not masonry. And so that extends from here and around this way.
And in the front?
In front, there's a gate. There's a gate with some brick masonry pilasters and wing walls, and so there's a very attractive gate structure right here.
It's a masonry that matches the house. It's really pretty sharp.
And the owner has talked to me about, because he doesn't even like the word maintenance road, so he's thinking about putting another smaller structure, gated structure here, so that is also attractive.
Masonry pillars, it says here. And then black aluminum fence between those two places?
Right, between here and here, we're thinking of putting that, again, that black wrought iron looking material.
But it's open basically except for the berm on the west side, right?
From this side, yes.
No fencing though.
No fencing to the west.
Right. And
Correct.
ditto, is there no fencing to the east? Where does the fence that starts in the upper? down
where
that
does it
corner?
start around here?
Where is that?
Yeah, I believe so. It starts, we weren't proposing on changing it. There's a...
Yeah, there's no fence to the east of the entrance.
Okay, nor along that east side.
There is some, but way in the back.
Some, I think it starts maybe about here.
Yeah, there's
Thank
like
you.
a 6 foot, I
That
think it's like
helps
a
me a lot.
vinyl coated chain link.
So the privacy is really around primarily the house and the
Correct.
auxiliary structures, and then the gated area to the access road, shall we
Yes.
call it?
Right.
I guess we got the idea from the Board of Appeals, who used the word attractive and nuisance, that this house and the activities behind it are attractive, and the less you can have people looking into it, And maybe, hey, I'd like to swim in that pool.
Yeah.
Was one of the reasons that the owner thought, maybe I'd better think about a little taller fence.
But this also leaves a fair amount of the Sitka Street frontage and the sides open, so it doesn't close the whole thing
Oh,
off from the
absolutely.
neighborhood.
We're not proposing really any changes there. This house is so far back.
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah.
500 feet is the ordinance, but I think in reality, the front of the houses in the neighborhood are like 750, 800. And he owns, Mr. Schmidt owns everything from here to Superior, and that's well in excess of 1,000 feet. And then, you're hard pressed to see anything other than the front of that house, even standing back by the ball diamonds. For the variance board, we took pictures, and you can just see the roof line. It's a large house, don't get me wrong, but it's situated tucked back in there. It's a little deceptive on how large it is until you actually get in there, which, if it's gated off, you know.
Thank you.
Sure. Thanks.
Any further discussion?
Apart from the fact that I really don't like having a fortress in the middle of our community, I see nothing to object to here and would be happy to move acceptance.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to recommend approval. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Up to item 9, consideration with possible action on the request to declare city property surplus near Paula Street and Sussex Road, submitted by the DPW.
Thank you. This item is located on the east side of town. This is near Sussex Road. As you can see, right now it is just used primarily as a farmed area. It's open, vacant green space. But the area immediately next to it is being platted as we speak, with the addition following that will pull Paula Street, which is the furthest most road to the left here, all the way through to connect with Sussex. So on the exhibits that you have, it does show that connection and how we're planning to anticipate for that. What we have left over as right-of-way from Sussex Road being reconstructed is this outlot right here. So we currently hold on to this, and with the connection of Paula coming through, there's really no need for us or DPW to hold on to this parcel anymore. So when looking at the design of Paula Street, they thought that if they curved this, this would be the best as far as views for this curved road here. But then also this lot becomes a buildable lot, which gives our redevelopment authority the ability to then sell it. So what we're proposing is that there's a tiny little parcel here that's going to be less than 400 square feet that gets adjoined to this property owner. They probably already think it's their yard, so that really shouldn't be an issue. This one would then also be given to the developer who's part of this application onto this parcel here. And then this can either be developed through the RDA as a buildable lot, or if the developer would like to adjust these lot lines as part of this platting process, to make this a little bit larger. It is a pretty awkward parcel only because it's on the corner. But that won't be developed until Paula Street does come through, because that's where all the utility lines will come through. So we are recommending approval of this request. No conditions, it's a pretty straightforward ask.
Hallelujah.
Thank you.
I move approval.
Second. We have a motion and a second to approve. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? This motion also passes.
Couldn't see anything to discuss about.
Yeah. Well, we can discuss it if you want. Informational. Item 10, the request to review residential driveway widths submitted by Alderman Barb Dorf. District 5 has been withdrawn by the petition. Other guys, we have the director's update.
All right, did not meet last month with the Plan Commission, so there's no extra report at this last meeting. With that, the comprehensive plan amendment for East Mason and Baird, that Dan Gerben project, third reading, it was approved. So other than that, that's it.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion and second to adjourn.
I knew you were ready, Randy.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.
I knew that was going